Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable, see playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1641, The Unfamiliar Lavender. The massive form turned out to be the body of an adult genuine dragon. Its dark cyan scales were closely packed, forming a strong layer of armor on its body. It emitted a dreamy luster underneath the sun's rays. Two sharp, yellow horns protruded from its head and its bewitching red eyes exuded such a powerful aura that hit like a tidal wave upon those who watched it with awe. If a genuine phoenix's rank and potential depended on the number of feathers on its tail, to a genuine dragon, these things were measured by the number of claws it had. Ordinary genuine dragons normally had 3 while stronger ones had 4. The strongest genuine dragon had 5. Only 2, 5-clawed genuine dragons existed in the entire genuine dragon world. The eldest of the 9 dragon brothers and also the strongest existence in the genuine dragon world, the 5-clawed golden dragon. The other was the similarly 5-clawed black dragon. The evil dragon that the celestial position race had once captured also had 5 claws. However, the dark cyan dragon had 6. The dragon shot straight to the sky and let out a mighty roar. Roar. This was no simple roar. By just hearing that loud, powerful noise, all weak creatures and lower-level vicious beasts of the rosy cloud world began to submit and tremble in their caves. The dark cyan dragon's roar triggered something in these creatures, a sense of instinctive fear for survival in the face of such a powerful being. This kind of instinct was something in their bones that was formed through the countless years of evolution, passed down from generation to generation. Even the Supreme Lords and the 2 queens felt their heartbeat quicken. Whoosh! The enormous genuine dragon circled the air once before heading straight towards the inauguration altar and lowering its massive head. From the dragon's head fell down a girl. She somersaulted in the air and landed light as a feather on the big crater. Elena, Latonia, and Supreme Lord Corbin stood near while Supreme Lord Shadow was currently bound to Zen by the death chain. That woman ignored all of them and walked towards Zen. Lavender, he called out in such a gentle voice as she approached. The woman in front of him looked so familiar yet exuded an unreal aura of strange unfamiliarity. She was as pure as a newborn baby, her entire body emitting a perfect aura. Yet, all in all, she was Lavender. She had always appeared before Zen in soul form, so it was only understandable why he felt so strange facing her now. Even when she was in the form of the sword spirit, it was still as insubstantial as a shadow. So this should be what Lavender was like in his mind. He couldn't help but feel somewhat unfamiliar with this brand new body of hers. Lavender, on the other hand, did not have any regard for these strange feelings he had. She quickly rushed towards Zen and pulled him into an embrace. Zen did not struggle, nor did he say anything and instead simply buried his head deep in her chest. Her aura might be unfamiliar and strange, so far from the Lavender he was used to, but deep inside he knew that it was still her. At that moment, Zen felt as if all the burden had been lifted from his shoulders. As Lavender held Zen, she was also glaring daggers at Elena who stood not far away from them. The killing intent was evident in the queen's raging eyes. This day has finally come. Jerk. Her entire body was tensed as she stared at Elena in motionless rage. Meanwhile, Elena simply stared back at Lavender with her teeth clenched. It was the only way she could conceal the turmoil in her heart. How could this be? It wouldn't have been that big of a problem if Zen was so good that she wasn't able to kill him. Sealing him with the punishment of eternal night was already enough and she could have just handed him over to the sacred race. Leroy had lost all will to fight. A Supreme Lord that had entered the 5 aging processes posed no threat to her at all. It would have been so easy for her to have ended him. Everything was under her control. Even Supreme Lord Corbin and Supreme Lord Shadow helped her despite having been initially neutral. The odds were all in Elena's favor. How could there be such a huge, sudden turn of events? Why did such a large, 6-clawed genuine dragon appear? Weren't the strongest dragons only 5-clawed? Why and how in the world did Lavender appear in front of her? Didn't she disappear a long time ago? Why did the faith energy in her pool of faith disappear in an instant? All these thoughts circulated in Elena's panicked mind. Just a moment ago, she felt as if she was in control, but in the blink of an eye, it was as if she had lost everything. The extreme disappointment was enough to drive Elena mad. She was just about to go crazy, but at the last moment, she decided to channel her rage into a powerful lightning strike at Lavender. Lavender sneered as she watched Elena, who had turned herself into a bolt of lightning that rushed towards her. "Spear," she said, taking out the saint-killing spear from Zen's space ring. Whoosh! The moment she held the spear, her entire aura changed. Rich, malicious auras spiraled into the saint-killing spear while long, thin bone spikes condensed on her back. The bones all formed into two, irregular bone wings condensed by faith energy. This was Lavender's fighting state. In the Demon Knight race, the Queen of Life and the Queen of Punishment didn't need to go into battle. All wars were led by the Queen of Killings, who was born for battle. Thus, Lavender was the only one who had this kind of special, fighting state. Lavender had activated this fighting state before. By relying on the faith energy in the dark world, Lavender had once condensed this pair of bone wings for herself. However, at that time, Elena had quickly sealed Lavender's pool of faith. You are the jerk." Elena looked crazy and angry. Her once beautiful place now looked distorted and creepy. She rose and frantically poured life vitality into the Saint Thunder Meteor Hammer. Her strike was no doubt intimidating, but the only reason she was so strong was because of the faith energy in the pool of faith. Now that she had lost her supply, she had no choice but to rely on her life vitality. Her level right now was only that of a world lord, at most a top-level grand world lord. Lavender almost laughed at how pathetic her opponent looked. She turned the saint-killing spear and a massive spear shadow appeared. Shadowy spin. The spear shadow was blood red and was several times stronger than the shadowy spin she had used before. However, instead of shooting it straight to Elena, she angled it in such a way that it hit the Saint Thunder Meteor Hammer. Crackle! Countless lightning bolts spread throughout the hammer and tried to counter the saint-killing spear. Lavender merely shook the spear gently and made all the lightning bolts disappear. Elena's strike didn't work, so she decided to change her angle. The Saint Thunder Meteor Hammer once again smashed down towards Lavender. The Queen of Killings was calm in the face of such aggression. She pulled back the spear and pointed it at the Saint Thunder Meteor Hammer once again. Boom, 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 boom. There was a series of explosions as the two clashed. Elena struck out a dozen times and Lavender countered even more. The difference though was that Elena had gone all out while Lavender was very much relaxed in blocking the attacks directed at her. Whoosh! It seemed Lavender had gotten bored of Elena's pestering. She suddenly raised her spear and made the Saint Thunder Meteor Hammer fly out of Elena's hand. It spun in the air and created a small hole at the bottom of the huge crater. Now that she was without a weapon, the crazed look on Elena's face quickly melted. She had lost the pool of faith and then the Saint Thunder Meteor Hammer. There was nothing else she could do to fight against Lavender. Swish! At this time, Leroy suddenly shot down from the sky. He was initially quietly floating in the air but had fallen into despair. However, the quick progression of events completely flabbergasted him. It was as if he was in a dream. Was the image in front of him truly real? "My queen," he exclaimed as he rushed towards Lavender's side. Lavender's vicious face softened when she saw him. "Leroy, you have grown so much." A warrior at Leroy's level aging meant only one thing: he had finally entered the 5 aging processes. Such process was irreversible and Leroy would inevitably slide into death's abyss. There was no way that could change his fate. Chapter 1642, Be Swallowed. The heavenly destiny of Supreme Lord Leroy had been personally gifted by Lavender. Naturally, his feelings for her differed from the other Supreme Lords of the Demon Knight race. In the universe, Supreme Lords were the utmost existences, never did they submit to anyone. But the Supreme Lords of the Demon Knight race still maintained respect towards their queens. Most of the time, they were on equal footing. But Supreme Lord Leroy submitted to Lavender willingly, treating her as his master. For the sake of her return, he was willing to pay any price. No regret would come to him even if he had to sacrifice his own life. To him, hearing Lavender's simple greeting was already worth everything. The conflict before him hadn't been resolved, so it wasn't the time to reminisce about the past. Elena stood in front of Lavender, looking stubborn and unmoving. Such was her personality, paranoid and violence-driven. Although she knew that she had suffered a crushing defeat, she couldn't accept it in the least. No change could be hinted from Latonia's expression, she couldn't be read at all in that moment. Standing not too far away, Supreme Lord Corbin felt bitterness fill his heart. He and Supreme Lord Shadow had originally been neutral Supreme Lords. Never did they participate in the internal struggles of the Demon Knight race unless they were to face an invasion. This time, they had acted completely based on consideration of the situation. They believed that Zen could be brought down easily, and that Leroy and the other Demon Knight members weren't a match for them at all. After all, who would have thought that Zen's strength could still exceed anyone's imagination? Even after the two queens returned, they couldn't defeat him. Yet, such a change came about in the inauguration altar, something unexpected to all. Supreme Lord Corbin watched Lavender warily, preparing to use the grand teleportation to leave. If she were to control the Demon Knight race, he wouldn't be able to stay any longer. But as a Supreme Lord, it wasn't really difficult to find a hiding spot in the universe. The one who was most let down was probably Supreme Lord Shadow. Although he was completely healed, thanks to Latonia, he still had one side of the chain on his body, he had no way to escape. Lavender's eyes swept slowly over them until they finally stopped on Latonia. Latonia, do you wish to be my enemy too? Why? After Lavender had brooded for such a long time, her question left everyone in shock. It seemed that Lavender knew nothing. Latonia looked at her strangely. She wasn't as depressed and unwilling as Elena, so she gave a free, easy smile. Since we're taking different sides, it's natural that I become your enemy. Although Latonia was neither good at nor enjoyed fighting, under the soul-sealing needle's control, she wasn't left with another choice. Sides? What sides? The statement confused Lavender even further. In the end, she could only look at Zen pleadingly. I only remember the time before you went to the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land. I can't remember what happened afterwards. To erase the soul-sealing needle, Lavender's memories were completely lost. But the inauguration altar was connected to the three queens, it contained all the memories of the past queens, including Lavender's. But these memories were limited to the ones from within the evolutionary universe. Such memories of Lavender following Zen into the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land were not recorded by the altar. When Zen returned, Lavender's soul was like a wooden stake, making it impossible to remember a single detail. Before, when Zen had stuffed the ancestral dragon inside the altar, he managed to attach Lavender's soul to the dragon's body. It was a very risky move, and Zen himself didn't know how effective it would be. But all the prerequisites to entering the inauguration altar were there. The ancestral dragon could travel through space, ordinary enchanted barriers and arrays couldn't stop the creature, and such was its innate ability. Lavender's soul was the prerequisite to entering the inauguration altar. For many years, Supreme Lord Leroy had waited, refusing to move without Lavender by his side. It was impossible for him to enter the inauguration altar and destroy the pools of faith with his own power. Since the conditions had been met, Zen could only give the ancestral dragon a few instructions and resign the rest to fate. But never did he expect such results. Not only did the ancestral dragon carry Lavender to the inauguration altar and help her regain her memories, it also devoured the faith energy in Latonia's and Alina's pools of faith. This energy had been accumulated over countless years by the Demon Knight members. Just how terrifying was the amount of faith energy contained within? One could only imagine. As the dragon devoured it, its body underwent an astonishing transformation until it reached its current form. It found a perfect spirit embryo within Latonia's pool of faith. Previously, Latonia had wanted to exchange the spirit embryo for the saint-killing spear, but Zen rejected it. Now that Lavender had recovered her memories, she naturally took in the spirit embryo as her own. It was bred from the pool of faith, which Latonia had done with tremendous concentration. Such was a truly perfect body, from the smallest of meridians to the tip of every hair. No flaws or impurities stained it, and the spirit embryo was in an acceptable condition for the soul. With almost no hitches, Lavender managed to take it over. Then, it began growing rapidly until it transformed into Lavender's current appearance. So the perfect temperament that Zen had felt from her didn't originate from her own soul but from the spirit embryo. But Lavender didn't know about the entire universe's situation, nor did she know the position of the Demon Knight race as Supreme Lords. After taking over the spirit embryo and witnessing the ancestral dragon devour all the faith energy from Latonia's pool of faith, she felt somewhat guilty. She didn't hold a grudge against Latonia, after all. After Lavender and the ancestral dragon left the inauguration altar, she noticed Zen, followed by Elena. Naturally, in her eyes, Elena was an opponent, the two of them were always enemies. With the will of the worlds, Zen could see everything happening in the inauguration altar, which was why he had stayed and waited for the moment Lavender left. But he wasn't aware of how many memories there were regarding her at the altar. Seeing how confused she was, He used sound transmission to tell her about everything that had happened in the divine refinement Forbidden Land, including how she had lost her memories and all the changes that went down in the demon knight race. Only after hearing Zen's words did Lavender understand the demon knight race's current situation. This also led to her understanding of Latonia's words. Because of the existence of the soul-sealing needle, Latonia's position must have been different from her own. After erasing the soul-sealing needle, Lavender had no clue what it was. The issue of the needle was more complex than what she could deal with right away. But her gaze flew past Elena and suddenly fell on Supreme Lord Corbin. As the Queen of Killings, Lavender was by no means a soft-hearted woman. Even if her own race's Supreme Lords had committed an unforgivable sin, she would be decisive and make her move without hesitation. Supreme Lord Corbin, who had been preparing to run away, suddenly activated the grand teleportation, ready to flee. Swoosh! A blazing white power of the space law began blooming underneath his feet as he dissipated. You want to escape? This put a frown on Zen's and Supreme Lord Leroy's faces. Supreme Lords could teleport swiftly and travel far off in a blink of an eye. If a Supreme Lord had the intention of escaping, it made killing him all too difficult. Although Zen's death chain could lock down the Supreme Lord, the other end of it was still locked onto Supreme Lord Shadow. But just as Supreme Lord Corbin was about to use grand teleportation to escape, the ancestral dragon began to move. Suddenly, it raised its neck and its head shot out, opening its mouth wide, fiercely biting down on the void. Although the ancestral dragon's body was now enormous, its movements were unimaginably fast, they simply didn't match the creature's massive size. As it opened his mouth, everyone could see something inside it and hear Supreme Lord Corbin's rage. A mass of cyan flames exploded within the dragon's mouth. It was Supreme Lord Corbin's counterattack. But the ancestral dragon closed its mouth, sucking back in the cyan flames. After it chewed for a moment, the angry roars from within its mouth turned lighter and lighter. Supreme Lord Corbin had actually been chewed up and swallowed by the dragon. When Supreme Lord Shadow and the rest of them saw the scene, they sucked in a cold breath of air. None of them could understand why the dragon would bite down on Supreme Lord Corbin when he had already used grand teleportation. Chapter 1643. Time of Purge. The grand teleportation technique allowed warriors to instantly appear from one place to another in great distances. It was known that only warriors at the World Lord level and above were fully able to grasp this technique. The use of this technique in battles between World Lords or Supreme Lords often made it difficult for the warriors to kill their opponents, as it provided an escape. The warriors who were proficient in the grand teleportation technique were well aware that the so-called teleportation wasn't as easy as it sounded. First, a normal space channel was needed. Then, it would use the space law to construct a path and fold the two ends of space together. The stronger the space law was, the higher the ratio of folding. The space channels of the Great Worlds could reduce a distance of 1,000 miles to just 10 miles, while the Upper World space channels could reduce a 10,000-mile distance to just 10 miles as well. Even more astonishing were the trans-border channels, for they could reduce a distance of 1,000,000 miles to just 10 miles. The grand teleportation technique the Supreme Lords used was no different, as it needed to create the same space channel as well. However, only a few people could use this space channel and it could not exist for long. It could only exist for several seconds or so, but it could reduce the distance of millions of miles to only a foot. To put it simply, a Supreme Lord who had executed the grand teleportation technique only needed to move 1 foot to cross millions of miles in reality. This teleportation didn't mean that they actually disappeared, but rather, they traversed millions of miles away at an extremely fast speed. It was naturally impossible to even catch up to such an extreme speed. Therefore, if a Supreme Lord used it to escape in battle, the opponent would have to use the same technique to keep up as well. On the other hand, the ancestral dragon's situation was a bit special. Its understanding of the space law had surpassed everyone's expectations. It was true that Supreme Lord Corbin had successfully used the grand teleportation technique to escape. He should be able to get away from the rosy cloud world in a blink of an eye. Never did he expect that, just when he had escaped into the space channel and started to move inside it, the ancestral dragon had suddenly dragged him out and bit him. Shock was written all over Zen's and everyone else's faces. Supreme Lord Corbin looked equal parts surprised and enraged. He quickly set his thoughts aside and launched a counterattack. Yet, it was no use because the ancestral dragon had absorbed all of the faith energy in the two pools of faith. This present ancestral dragon was already a full-grown adult and was terrifyingly strong. Supreme Lord Corbin fought fiercely and struggled, but the ancestral dragon had eventually swallowed him up. After Supreme Lord Corbin's demise, the heavens shook and roared. All the Supreme Lords in the evolutionary universe had sensed the tremor at the same time. At that moment, they understood that a Supreme Lord had just passed away. However, they didn't exactly know who among their kind had died. 5 Supreme Lords had died in the evolutionary universe in the last couple of years. 3 of them belonged to the Humanity Alliance, and the other 2 were from 2 small races. Moreover, the number of Supreme Lords who had died in the last 2 decades had already surpassed 10. Such an event would have been quite unlikely back then. From that situation alone, it was safe to say that the entire evolutionary universe was undergoing a violent change. The ancestral dragon belched before it swayed its massive body like a pendulum. Then, it opened its mouth and coughed twice. Its guttural sound was as loud as a clap of thunder, and as it continued to cough, cyan blue flames burst from its throat. It was clear that Supreme Lord Corbin had died a tragic death, as he had struggled some more even after being swallowed. Supreme Lord Corbin was known for his extremely powerful type of flames. The ancestral dragon continued to cough some more until the flames in its mouth decreased rapidly. However, it didn't seem to be gone completely. It didn't take long before the ancestral dragon roared in anger. It raised its head in a snap and opened wide its enormous mouth. The ground shook and trembled as the vibrations from the dragon's roar rippled in waves. Suddenly, a red-hot demonic breath shot out from its mouth. The cyan smoke was a blend of the red-hot embers and some traces of the cyan flames. However, the cyan flames didn't last long and were soon gone in a blink of an eye. After the ancestral dragon had purged all of the cyan flames from its body, it sighed in satisfaction and crouched down to the inauguration altar. Meanwhile, its burning breath continued to spread in the sky, leaving demonic red clouds that didn't dissipate for a long time. A nervous gulp rolled down Supreme Lord Shadow's throat as he watched the scene, followed by a chill that ran down his spine. Even he, a Supreme Lord, was in awe of the colossal dragon. Just then, Lavender's gaze drifted to Supreme Lord Shadow. It could be said that Supreme Lord Corbin was much stronger than Supreme Lord Shadow. While the latter had good assassination skills, his strength had been greatly reduced because of the death chain that bound him with Zen. "It's your turn now," Lavender said in a cold voice. It was now her time to purge. She had just learned about the current situation from Zen and knew that the Demon Knight race was in dire need of powerful warriors. Even though a Supreme Lord's value varied from race to race, Lavender did not intend to spare Supreme Lord Shadow's life anyway. Besides, the death chain wouldn't break if Supreme Lord Shadow didn't die. Zen couldn't just be linked to him forever. "Please spare my life, my queen," Supreme Lord Shadow pleaded. He was so desperate that he had completely collapsed in despair. At that moment, he was no longer the dignified Supreme Lord that he once was. However, Lavender remained impassive. Her state of mind was as cold and hard as ice. She had reflected on her past life countless times back when she was still hidden in Zen's body. Now, she decided that she would no longer show mercy except for Zen for the rest of her life. As Lavender held her saint-killing spear and slowly approached, Supreme Lord Shadow still didn't give up, begging her, "Please have mercy on me, my queen. I swear that I will do everything I can to protect the Demon Knight race, and I won't regret even if I die for the sake of our race." "Oh really?" Her lips stretched into a thin smile. She looked immensely charming, but Supreme Lord Shadow could feel nothing but fear. "Please give me a chance to turn over a new leaf. There is no basis for my words, so I will swear with my will of martial arts." Before he even began to speak, Lavender's saint-killing spear had already started to spin, and a spear shadow was headed straight towards him. Left with no other choice, he quickly hid himself in the shadows with gritted teeth. Shadow dance. A cloud of black shadows appeared and swarmed Supreme Lord Shadow until his whole body was completely concealed, and his aura had dissipated. Once he was gone, the black cloud actually moved towards Lavender. Supreme Lord Shadow wailed desperately and made a split-second decision to attack. The Shadow Dance was one of Supreme Lord Shadow's most powerful concealment abilities. Theoretically speaking, no one in the entire universe would be able to track him if he used such an attack. Unfortunately, things were made more complicated because he was bound by the death chain that exposed his every move. HMPH, Lavender simply snorted. She suddenly accelerated her pace and surprisingly did not dodge the cloud of black shadows when she charged straight ahead. Puff, puff, puff. Just then, the others who were present heard several piercing sounds. Fresh blood splattered everywhere and painted everything it touched red. When the black shadows were gone, Lavender slowly returned with the saint-killing spear in her hand. Supreme Lord Shadow froze on the spot with his eyes wide open as 3 fist-sized holes appeared on his heart, stomach, and the center of his chest. Right after, the heavens shook violently once more. Another Supreme Lord had died. The death chain that bound Supreme Lord Shadow and Zen together dissipated when the Supreme Lord was no more. It was only then when Zen had finally regained his freedom. A relieved sigh escaped his lips and he returned the death chain to his space ring. Although the death chain was a valuable treasure, it had its disadvantages. He could have just escaped right now if it wasn't for the light band that bound him to his opponent. Therefore, he realized that he had to think twice the next time he thought about using it. On the other hand, Lavender turned to face Elena and Latonia this time. You are controlled by the soul-sealing needles. The crimes that you have committed against the Demon Knight race can't be blamed on you, Lavender said. However, Elena couldn't help but snort coldly at her words. So what, even if I wasn't controlled by the soul-sealing needle, I wouldn't spare your life as well, she said. I know, it's why I'm not letting you go, Lavender shot back as her eyes glowed red. The grudges she and Elena held against each other didn't really involve the soul-sealing needle. It was just that Lavender was self-righteous to a point that she chose to tell right from wrong. Chapter 1644, A Shadow. Since you know everything, please go ahead. I've brought this upon myself, said Elena smiling calmly. She no longer had any strategies left for a counterattack. In her dispute with Lavender, the final result was a crushing defeat. However, her smile wasn't entirely innocent, there seemed to be hidden shrewdness behind her calm demeanor. Elena's expression was as tranquil as a lake, but her soul was trembling faintly. The soul-sealing needle in the depths of her soul was emitting a faint light. Lavender slowly walked toward Elena grasping her saint-killing spear tight in her hand, her steps slow and heavy. The hatred between her and Elena was complicated. In the beginning, she had been killed by Elena and become a remnant soul. Then, Elena had sent out her people, Vivica, Elspeth, Salvador and Anisha to hunt her. The four of them had killed themselves in front of Lavender. It was all too much. Now that the opportunity for revenge was right in front of her, she didn't feel much joy even though she could easily kill her. Buzz. The two tips of the saint-killing spear began to rotate. The two dots on the tips of the spear formed a circle of light due to the high-speed rotation. 10 feet, 5 feet, 3 feet, Supreme Lord Leroy and Zen stood behind Lavender, quietly watching the scene. This was a grudge match between Lavender and Elena, and they would not interfere. Lavender's tactics on dealing with the Queen of Life depended entirely on her mood. This spear strike was only a foot away from Elena. If Lavender lightly swung it with her arm, it would be able to crush Elena's exquisitely beautiful face and reduce it to a pile of mud. But in this instant, the soul-sealing needle within Elena's soul suddenly broke into two. Pa! A light but sharp sound came from deep within Elena's soul. The instant the soul-sealing needle broke, Elena's entire aura underwent a dramatic change. Puff, puff, puff. An aura, which originated since ancient times but had been passed down eternally, was emitting from Elena's body. Under the spell of this incredible aura, everything in the universe was so tiny. Soon, an enormous transparent figure appeared behind Elena. The translucent figure did not have a completely formed body. It was just a spectral aura that constantly whirled in the air, forming the shape of a person. Elena's face revealed a proud smile and her voice also became louder. Lavender, how naive you are. Do you really think you have what it takes to kill me? Ha ha ha. Elena suddenly spread out both her hands and tilted her head backwards. She had a crazed smile on her face as she loudly proclaimed, Master, you're here. That translucent figure continued to grow. Almost instantly it went from a height of 100 feet to more than 1,000 feet, then 10,000 feet, before finally transforming into a figure of 100,000 feet. Roar. Sensing threat from the transparent figure, the ancestral dragon stretched out its enormous head and roared at the figure. As the ancestral dragon roared, the figure suddenly waved its huge arm. The translucent arm continued to move and came fiercely towards the ancestral dragon. The ancestral dragon was not to be outdone. Its mouth split open, revealing sharp teeth, and it heavily bit the arm. However, the translucent figure was faster than the ancestral dragon. It flipped its invisible arm, and directly slapped the ancestral dragon's head. Bam! A muffled sound was heard as the ancestral dragon suffered a heavy blow from this slap. Its massive body tumbled through the air from the inauguration altar and slammed heavily onto the ground. The ancestral dragon's massive body created a 1,000-mile-long ravine on the ground. The moment it fell to the ground, its tail smashed down heavily, causing the ground to crack instantly. Using the power of the strike, the ancestral dragon shot up towards the transparent figure once again. As it flew towards the transparent human figure, the ancestral dragon's mouth began to accumulate a demonic red light. It looked like it was about to spit out a mouthful of dragon breath. The transparent human figure once again reached out and started shoving the head of the ancestral dragon down towards the ground. Boom! Under this pressure, another massive ravine was formed, spanning thousands of miles. This ravine spread into the distance, covering almost the entire rosy cloud world and becoming a permanent scar on this supreme world. Roar, roar, roar. Now the ancestral dragon released a vicious aura and twisted its body wildly in front of the transparent figure. However, no matter how much it struggled, it was unable to come out of the giant hand. In the end, its tail kept dancing and finally curled around the arm. The translucent figure reached out with its other hand and grabbed the tail of the ancestral dragon, ripping it off its own arm. It seized the tail of the creature and sent the gigantic ancestral dragon flying tens of millions of miles, smashing it against the edge of the rosy cloud world with great force. Boom! The battle between the two giant creatures caused an abnormally intense vibration in the world. The ancestral dragon slammed into the edge of the rosy cloud world with its powerful kinetic energy, causing the entire world to shake violently. The ground began to crack as volcanoes erupted, setting off a series of earthquakes. Elena stood at the feet of the transparent giant and raised her head to observe at this scene. A faint smile appeared on her face. Then she shifted her gaze towards Lavender, a proud and arrogant expression taking over her face. Lavender, do you really think that everything has come to an end? At this point, Lavender, Zen and Supreme Lord Leroy stared at the invisible figure, their expressions sullen. Judging by the powerful aura emitted by the transparent figure, they might not be able to contend against it. This is the aura of a holy being. Zen frowned and narrowed his eyes as he sized up the figure. Holy Jay and Holy Drew were the most powerful among all the mighty warriors that Zen had met. These holy beings' auras were ancient and vast. They were the only ones who could be described as eternal. Even true gods didn't have these kinds of auras. But it was impossible for a holy being to enter the universe, wasn't it? The transparent figure's head lowered suddenly as it looked at Zen and Lavender. Its massive body rotated slightly and its giant hand was raised. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The figure flailed its giant hand about violently, causing disturbances in the surrounding air currents and setting off a hurricane. Let's go. Even the ancestral dragon was thrown off by the transparent figure. Zen knew that they had no way of fighting it and could only avoid it at this moment. He was trying to help Lavender escape, but he himself chose not to leave. Instead, he charged towards the giant translucent hand that was coming down on him. Bam! Transfer the power. Zen had a head-on collision with the transparent palm. Compared to the enormous palm, he was as minuscule as an ant. However, it was this very ant that strongly blocked the palm midair. Zen transferred the boundless power in the deadly palm into another supreme world. At this moment, there was a tremendous power surge in a supreme world occupied by the sacred race. In a bizarre turn of events, a palm imprint appeared on the supreme world, and the entire surface of the world began to crack and crumble. Countless cracks appeared thereafter, and then began to disintegrate. Boom! For all the living beings in that supreme world, this strike was the beginning of the apocalypse. After the collapse of the supreme world, it constantly spiraled downwards, and the ascending passageways connecting from the lower world also began to break one by one. Countless living creatures were desperately flying towards the sky in a bid to escape nature's wrath. The power of this palm strike could completely destroy a supreme world. Zen's heart was thumping like crazy as well. Supreme lords were unable to demolish a supreme world completely. For example, Alina's profound holy thunder had obliterated a third of the surface area of the celestial wolf world. The profound holy thunder had only caused destruction on the surface area of the celestial wolf world. However, no supreme lords could wipe out a supreme world. Even when several supreme lords fought against each other in the Orange Sea world, they weren't able to make the entire Orange Sea world disappear. At least half of the Orange Sea world still remained. But now, the translucent palm had shattered a supreme world. The palm attack was blocked by a small, ant-sized warrior. The transparent shadow seemed to be caught off guard. However, it only hesitated for a moment and then used its other hand to hit Zen. Bam! Another vicious muffled sound. Left with no other choice, Zen once again transferred the power he received to another world. Another supreme world became Zen's scapegoat. After he transferred the power to that supreme world, it would also be desecrated without exception. This won't do, Zen thought anxiously. If he allowed this translucent figure to keep attacking him, and he, in turn, kept sacrificing all the supreme worlds of the upper world, it would still not be enough. He had to think of another way. Chapter 1645. Another giant phantom. Each time when a supreme world collapsed, only a few creatures would be able to survive. Hundreds and thousands of mortals in the cities and surrounding towns had no chance of escaping such a disaster. It was an unforeseen occurrence for them to be prepared. Zen's face darkened. He hadn't expected that such a powerful phantom would suddenly appear at the last moment. Whoosh! Without any remorse, the phantom once again lifted its hand in an attempt to blow another hit towards Zen. With a gust of wind, a strong pressure resonated. With a sudden realization, Zen's face showed signs of struggle and hesitation. He couldn't think of a better way to deal with this attack. If he didn't block it, then the entire rosy cloud world would definitely be destroyed by the phantom's other powerful attack. With no time to lose, he was having cold feet caught between choices on how to deal with the attack, but at that moment, he suddenly felt a cold killing intent advancing from behind him. "Get out of the way, Zen!" A resolute strong voice shouted from behind him. Zen turned around and saw Lavender advancing on a fast speed. The bone wings behind Lavender's back had fully extended. Each of the bone wings emitted a scarlet light. Lavender had already completely recovered her strength after unsealing her pool of faith. Using Latonia's spirit embryo, she became even stronger than she had been in the past. She was originally the strongest person of the Demon Knight race. After the three queens took each of their own positions, the powers of their faith energy were different as well. Latonia's faith energy represented new life and fraternity. Her green faith energy transformed was the power of life law. Alina's faith energy represented rules and order. It would then be transformed into the power of thunder law. Those who violated the rules and order of the race would be punished by thunder. As for Lavender's faith energy, it represented destruction and annihilation. Her faith energy was actually a fusion of the Demon Knight race member's malicious aura. It gave her an excellent and advanced skill in killing. With Lavender's fighting strength and acquired power, she had far surpassed Elena. The blood-red faith energy she absorbed contained an intense aura of killing. The scarlet lights on her bone wings constantly fluctuated as they converged onto the saint-killing spear in Lavender's hands, forming spear shadows that surrounded her weapon. As Lavender brandished the saint-killing spear, the spear shadows that seemed to be solid began to sway along with the spear. Converge. Swish. As she ordered, the spear shadows began to converge on the saint-killing spear. On the surface of the saint-killing spear, the demonic red color had reached its saturation point. Traces of malicious aura were like flames slowly spreading out to its surroundings. At the time when Zen blocked the first attack of the phantom's transparent giant hand, Lavender on the side had already begun preparing this skill. With a wave of her slender bone wings, they changed their circular formation and swiftly retracted below her back. She then raised the saint spear above her head. Her slender body seemed to have become one with the spear. Swoosh! Her body shot into the sky like a rocket. Despite knowing that the power of the phantom's giant hand was incomparably strong, Lavender's figure was like a thin needle which instantly pierced through the transparent hand. After she passed through the transparent giant hand, the formless energy inside the hand began to surge out from the hole. "She's so powerful." Seeing this scene, Zen couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Lavender's strike was probably no different from the full power attack of a mid-rank Supreme Lord. It seemed to have caused some damage to the giant phantom. Swoosh! Lavender swiftly made a turn in the air and a second time flew back towards the giant phantom. Her speed was astoundingly fast, and in the blink of an eye, she had once again pierced through the phantom's chest and drilled out from its back. The giant phantom's speed on the other hand was not slow either. Its two hands stretched out, wanting to get a hold of Lavender. In the end, its speed appeared to be slower than Lavender's, failing to catch her in several consecutive attempts. Swish! 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 Relying on her extremely fast speed, Lavender was like a red shuttle which flew back and forth in the air, inflicting multiple wounds on the giant phantom's body. With nothing it could do against Lavender, the giant phantom just twisted its enormous body and cried out in pain. Awoo! Left with a last attempt, the giant phantom raised its hands and suddenly let out a deafening roar. The roar released a majestic strong aura. As the formidable aura spread out, whether it was Zen, or Leroy and Lavender, all of them immediately felt an extreme sense of oppression, as if someone had struck them on the head with a metal hammer. Lavender, who was originally flying at a high speed, suddenly felt dizzy. She was unable to maintain her balance, making her struggle and sway on the air. The giant phantom reached out its hand, grabbing her body at an extremely fast speed. Its other hand was raised up in attempt to slam down onto Lavender's head. The strength of the giant phantom was beyond imagination. With a sudden slam of its hand, even a supreme world would be shattered to pieces. If it were to slam onto Lavender's body, she would definitely be crushed into a pile of meat paste. No, Fear flashed across Zen's face. It was nearly impossible to save Lavender from the hands of the giant phantom. Lavender had just managed to get her physical body, and seized back her pool of faith. He hadn't even talked much with her, but now he would have to watch her die in front of him. His state of mind was in total chaos, and his intense emotions made his soul tremble unceasingly. Leroy also had a look of despair on his face. Their attack on the inauguration altar had been a series of twists and turns. To the point of being despaired earlier, they had been given a ray of hope witnessing Lavender's revival and had seen her take control of the situation. But now, the situation suddenly turned against them once more. As for Elena, under the feet of the giant phantom, showed a big smile and anticipation on her face. The soul-sealing needle was in fact not a symbol of slavery. In truth, the three queens had been in a semi-controlled state. The soul-sealing needle could change their minds to a certain degree, but it hadn't controlled them completely. As the soul-sealing needle released more and more memories into their souls, Elena gradually understood Murphy's plan. Relying with only the power of the demon knight race, they weren't much of a threat to the evolutionary universe. They had been distracted by the ogres and weren't able to offer much help to the sacred race. However, once the soul-sealing needle in the queen's souls broke, it would be able to summon a phantom of Murphy. The phantom was in fact a method for Murphy to come here. Although the power of the giant phantom was greatly reduced after it descended on the evolutionary universe, it still possessed the strength of a true god. This was also one of the demon knight race's trump cards. However, this trump card could only be used 3 times. It was first used when the soul-sealing needle in Lavender's soul had been destroyed in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land. The second one was used by Elena in order to kill Lavender. Hurry up, kill her. Elena no longer cared about the situation in the evolutionary universe. All she wanted right now was to see Lavender die in front of her. At this moment, Zen felt as if time slowed down. He could see Lavender using all her power and strength to wiggle out from the giant's palm. Beneath her elegant eyebrows, her beautiful eyes were shining with determination and boldness. She might have already realized that she would not be able to escape, but after entering her fighting mode, she was affected by the malicious aura and couldn't feel any fears. In the midst of struggle, her eyes met Zen's. She realized something but only looked at him with a hint of regret. Her regretful gaze contained too many unspoken implications, creeping through Zen's heart. That moment seemed to have turned into eternity, and everything became increasingly slower in Zen's eyes. Zoom. Unexpectedly at the same time, everything came to a halt as Zen felt a gust of cold wind blew past his back. A figure of a person, in a flash, appeared behind him. The figure quickly grew in size and soon turned into another giant phantom. Without wasting any second, it waved its giant fist and blew a strike towards Murphy's phantom. Boom! A muffled sound could be heard as Murphy's phantom was thrown to the ground. It was not able to hurt Lavender with just a mere gap of seconds. Being attacked by another oppression, it lost balance throwing Lavender up into the sky. Bang! Murphy's phantom fell heavily to the ground and crushed the inauguration altar behind it, creating numerous cracks and canyons on the ground. These cracks were enough to disrupt the stability of the entire rosy cloud world. The entire supreme world continued to shake. It seemed like it might collapse at any moment. The giant phantom behind Zen only threw one punch, but the effect was beyond expectation. It was not just on par with Murphy's phantom but could be even more powerful. This, Zen was dumbstruck as he stared at the giant phantom behind him. This phantom had appeared once in the past, and it was this figure who had helped him destroy all of the luck-devouring snakes the time he encountered the luck-devouring snake tribulation. He had never imagined that this figure would suddenly appear once more and even gave a powerful blow to Murphy's phantom. Chapter 1646. The Holy Being's Words. Neither of these two giants had a tangible body. In other words, they weren't perceptible by touch. The transparent giant summoned by Elena was nothing more than a ball of rolling energy waves. In the same sense, the figure standing behind Zen was equally a sphere of floating energy. For now, the two giants seemed to have stopped attacking each other for the time being. Instead, they stood rather motionlessly, facing each other in midair. The energy in the transparent giant's head suddenly began to fluctuate violently, forming a huge gap in space. The gap warped and turned into a huge terrifying mouth, from which a fierce wind blew abruptly. At first, the sound of the whistling wind was very sharp, but as the enormous mouth continued to change shapes, the intonation began to decrease. It took quite some time to adjust the sound volume, but afterward, the constantly changing wind sound changed into a melody, and in the end, it actually transformed into a person's voice. Mike, we meet again. As Zen watched the huge distorted mouth, A look of surprise appeared on his face. He knew that the transparent giant had no way of making any sound on its own, and therefore, it had to influence the speed and angle of the airflow in order to produce any noise at all. Even though the wind sound was rather strange, other people could still hear the clear words, too. Mike, Zen wondered silently to himself. He was of course astonished to have heard these words. The figure's silhouette behind him was none other than Mike, of course. Zen couldn't help but glance at the figure behind him. He was just too curious. The figure was just a simple outline, which made it rather hard to see its appearance whatsoever. However, the aura exuding from this silhouette was extraordinary and powerful. Zen felt mesmerized. The silhouette was silent for a moment before speaking. Murphy, you personally took action, thus violating the rules of the Hall of Holy Beings. Zen wasn't sure exactly where Mike's voice was coming from, but each and every word he spoke could be heard clearly. Obviously, he didn't need to speak by means of the airflow sound as the transparent giant did. As this familiar voice reached Zen's ears, a rush of alarm washed over him and his heart started pounding violently. When this had all begun, he wasn't sure exactly whom the figure's outline belonged to. Now though, and more so after hearing Mike's all-familiar voice, he no longer had any doubt. A trace of warmth flowed through his heart as he thought back to the figure's silhouette that had helped him cross through the luck-devouring snake tribulation. As it turned out, his father had always been standing right behind him, but he had just never realized it before. Ha, ha, as a gust of wind surged out from the transparent giant's mouth, it let out a strange, chilling laugh at the same time. So what? The current Hall of Holy Beings is not what it used to be anymore. Anyway, I have only sent a single strand of my soul into the evolutionary universe. I believe that the Hall of Holy Beings won't even blame me for this, and there is no need to go against me for the sake of a late holy being. The transparent giant gradually became familiar with the airflow speed, now capable of uttering words more clearly and fluently. I'm not dead yet, Mike spoke again. You aren't any different than a dead holy being. Who cares if you rely on this round of universe to keep your holy heart? Sooner or later, it will still be destroyed by my own two hands. Ha, ha. Upon speaking these words, the transparent giant figure finished with a wild, cold laugh once again. No, I still have hope, said Mike. The silhouette of the figure's head lowered, and it appeared as though two invisible eyes were staring directly at Zen. Who? The transparent figure seated not too far away pointed a slender finger at Zen. Are you talking about this little guy? That's your hope? Please tell me you're kidding. Mike's silhouette stayed silent for a moment and then answered affirmatively and with confidence, yes, my son, Zen, is my hope. Zen had already learned all about Mike's attitude from Holy J. The 10 godly geniuses were both Mike's last struggle and hope, and Mike had placed great expectations on Zen. What a mistake you have made, placing all your hope on a simple secondary creature. Mike, you're still just as childish as ever, the translucent figure said. At these words, Zen raised his eyebrows and glared at the transparent figure. Murphy, he then roared as loud as he possibly could. I know I will step into the divine land one day. You can trust that I'll happily cut your head off in front of the Hall of Holy Beings. Today, Zen was no longer completely ignorant of the divine land. He had learned so much over time. In fact, Zen was currently using the chaotic energy in order to increase his personal voice volume. As a result, his voice was extremely loud and was filled with a sharp aura. This was Zen's utmost determination, and was something he had to face throughout his entire life. No matter how weak he was now, he had no way to escape. There was no longer any room for retreat. The figure's silhouette behind Zen remained silent. The transparent figure, which was formed by Murphy's energy soul, also kept silent for a short while before chuckling aloud. Brat, you don't seem to know what the divine land is, nor what kind of place the Hall of Holy Beings can be. Clearly, you don't have any idea who you're even talking to. You're just a mere holy being, Zen said calmly and nonchalantly. A mere holy being, he repeated. And at that, the transparent figure actually waved a pair of transparent hands and clapped. Bang, 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 with every clap of its hands, a dull and intense sound spread out and stung his ears. The entire space trembled, the earth shook, and more cracks appeared in the rosy cloud world. It was as though the clapping was going to cause some kind of landslide. At the same time, many members of the Demon Knight in the rosy cloud world were desperately pouring into the space tunnel. They could see that the rosy cloud world was on the verge of collapsing. In fact, most were sure it would collapse at any given moment. You may have guts. However, you're nothing but a young warrior without powerful strength. Sure, you're protected by your beloved father in the evolutionary universe. You're the son of the universe, and this place is your garden. Your every move, every word, every action, and every enemy are all under your father's control. There is no such thing as luck in the divine land, and there is also no such things as fortuitous encounters and coincidences waiting for you at every turn in the divine land. The divine land is a real and cruel world. Only then, will you ever understand that what you've just said should make you feel ashamed. Did you know all of that? Huh. Murphy, after all, was a holy being, too. Since a holy being owned an entire world, it was only natural that he had a lot of confidence. Facing Zen's rude remarks, Murphy didn't get angry, but instead, he analyzed the matter from Zen's point of view. This analysis, though, allowed Zen to become more certain of something in particular. As for the luck Murphy talked about, Zen had always believed that his luck was great. He also knew that for a martial artist to advance, they would need considerable effort, luck, and talent. However, thanks to Rocher's reminder, Zen found out that these fortuitous encounters were not due to luck at all. In fact, the various mysteries beneath the heavens were all deliberately arranged by someone. Besides, someone had arranged the path of martial arts for him ahead of time, too. These difficulties and impossible situations were all deliberate, and the purpose was to temper and test Zen's state of mind. All sorts of training methods were used in an attempt to urge Zen on to hard work, in order to push him toward reaching the next level as quickly as possible. There was only one person in the entire universe that possessed such a supernatural ability and could use all the resources in the universe to perform such a play. This person, of course, was no other than Mike, the owner of the evolutionary universe. When Zen had first discovered the truth, he was rather disappointed, and felt a little sad. Throughout his entire life, he was led to believe that everything he had obtained was through hard work, only to find out that the whole was arranged by his father. Once Zen was informed about what had happened to his father and his enemies in the divine land through Holy J, he managed to keep his calm. He didn't have the time or the right to argue with such things. Moreover, all the arrangements in the evolutionary universe contained his father's painstaking efforts. Zen, trust me, Murphy is only trying to strike a blow to your warrior spirit. In this world, Mike suddenly said to Zen. He was worried that there was something wrong with Zen's state of mind, even though Murphy was really telling the truth. I know, Zen replied calmly, with an even more determined expression in his eyes now. They shone like stars in the midnight sky. Murphy, even if that's true, I still want to behead you in front of the Hall of Holy Beings. No matter what you say today, to me, you're still nothing but a mere holy being. Mike's silhouette nodded once Zen finished speaking. Mike was satisfied with Zen's reaction. Murphy had said those words just to get under Zen's skin, to deter his state of mind, but what he said was the truth. Mike could control everything in the evolutionary universe. When Zen had encountered any desperate situation in the past, Mike had helped him every single time. If Zen left this place, he would also leave Mike's protection. And by then, he'd be facing situations that were thousands of times more dangerous than what he was facing right now. Sooner or later, he would have to face such situation on his own. Little brat, Murphy only wanted Zen to fully comprehend the genuine situation. He didn't expect Zen to be more stubborn than Mike, despite having said so much in an attempt to persuade him. Murphy on the other hand, even with his stable state of mind, also became furious. Chapter 1647, Path of Heavens. Murphy's anger only lasted a moment. As a holy being who was at the top of the hierarchy among all living beings, he didn't need to be concerned with such an insignificant fellow. So he changed the topic and sneered, Mike, it's too early to talk about the divine land. Your evolutionary universe will perish soon. At the moment, the evolutionary universe wasn't looking very optimistic. Even if there was no demon knight, the sacred race still held the upper hand. This was what Mike and Zen needed to face right now. There's no need for you to worry about that. If my evolutionary universe were to be destroyed, it would be because of fate. Mike replied dryly. Very good, I hope that you can endure it and live long enough till the day I see your son in the divine land. The energy fluctuations of the transparent giant were becoming weaker by the minute. His voice conveyed by the wind was also becoming stranger and more distorted. The giant formed from Murphy's energy soul gradually dissipated into the world. The moment the energy soul disappeared, the soul-sealing needle also made a quiet exit from the depths of Latonia's soul. At this, Alina's legs went soft like noodles, and she collapsed to the ground. Using the soul-sealing needle to ask Murphy's energy soul to descend was Alina's last, desperate move. It was originally only used during the final battle between the demon knight and the humans. But Elena had summoned it in advance to preserve her life and kill Lavender. To her surprise, the moment Murphy appeared on the scene, another holy being also appeared, and he turned out to be Zen's father. Elena could tell at first glance that Zen was extraordinary, but she had never thought that he was actually a direct descendant of a holy being. All she could do was accept this defeat, and as she did so, her vigor drained from her face. Her previously bright eyes were now dim and dull. Zen watched the energy wave dissipate. He suddenly remembered that Mike was still behind him. Shocked and afraid that Mike would disappear too, he turned around and called, "Father." Mike's silhouette did not disappear, but he did not respond either. Zen was nervous as he asked, "Father, are you still here?" "Yes, son, I'm here," Mike replied. Zen heaved a sigh of relief. As a youth, Zen had never been sensible. He thought that his father had died in the past few years, but he had accumulated too many doubts in his heart. Although he had more or less understood a few things, he still had questions. Mike's energy soul started to shrink with the violent energy fluctuations. The outline of the shadow became more and more solid. When it became the size of Zen's figure, Zen could make out Mike's appearance from the silhouette. He almost cried out loud when he saw his father's heroic appearance. Now that he had experienced the trials and tribulations of life and death, Zen had a state of mind that had become firm as steel. He knew that all negative emotions were useless and had completely abandoned these emotions in order to become stronger. Yet, standing in front of his father, he couldn't help but feel that he was still that frail child. Mike looked guilty as he saw the expression on Zen's face. The energy soul that he had kept in the universe could give Zen more guidance. But be it in the divine land or in the universe, one had to rely on themselves to reach a higher level of martial arts if they wanted to go further or even surpass Mike. So he had no choice but to create the illusion of death, creating one crisis after another to trap Zen within. He watched Zen struggle with all his might, like an injured beast, licking his wounds time and time again as he became stronger. He was happy that Zen had not disappointed him and had even performed better than he had expected. He also knew that doing so was too cruel to Zen. "Come with me." Mike turned around and waved his hand. An illusory gate appeared in front of him. The door looked like the entrance to a heavenly palace, but it also looked like a mirage, slowly floating before Zen. Mike was the first to step into the gate. Zen jumped up from the ground and looked back at Lavender. "Wait for me," he said, his lips barely moving. Saying thus, he went through the gate. Once the father and son disappeared through the door, it closed and disappeared. Lavender's gaze fell on Elena's body, and she laughed coldly. "Looks like we have to settle the score again." Elena had her soul-sealing needle broken in order to have Murphy descend. And when Murphy's energy soul had disappeared, Latonia's soul-sealing needle had also disappeared. At the moment, both Latonia and Elena only had the strength of an ordinary Grand World Lord. It was up to Lavender now. What was more, there was an ancestral dragon in the rosy cloud world. Lavender did not let Elena live because of the irreconcilable conflict between them. She knew that if she spared Elena's life, Elena would become a great danger to her in the future, which was why she decided to kill her. Lavender did not make things difficult for Latonia. After all, the rebellion that Latonia had led was because of the soul-sealing needle. She wasn't malicious by nature. And Lavender had relied on Latonia's spirit embryo in her pool of faith at the inauguration altar. Not long after, the Saint Lords of the 7 sacred places of the rosy cloud world, and the members of the Board of Elders of the Demon Knight were all gathered in front of the inauguration altar. The inauguration altar that symbolized the supreme power of the Demon Knight, was now in ruins, with the 3 pools of faith buried deep within them. Only after the people of the Demon Knight race had dug them out did they see the light of day again. 2 of the pools of faith were already empty. Only the pool belonging to Lavender had red water in it. The water in the pool of faith had to be accumulated over many years. The elders understood that now that only one queen remained in the Demon Knight, it was likely that the time of the 3 queens' reign over the Demon Knight would never reappear. Because of Elena, the Demon Knight had been exhausted from the upper echelons all the way to the bottom. But with Lavender's return, the situation was finally under control. There were 2 Supreme Lords in the Demon Knight who had accompanied Elena and Latonia to battle. They had chosen to leave because of the Queen's decree that Leroy had issued on Lavender's behalf. And under Lavender's summons, they had quickly returned to Rosy Cloud World. Thus, via her statue, Lavender issued another Queen's decree ordering all of the clansmen to band together. She knew that the Demon Knight was an alien race that Murphy had created. However, Mike had appeared and hadn't pursued the issue of the Demon Knight's origins. After all, with the disappearance of the soul-sealing needle, the Demon Knight would not be able to rebel. Mike must have realized this, and as a result, recognized the position of the Demon Knight in the universe. Since they were part of the evolutionary universe, they would naturally attack the sacred race when necessary. When Zen stepped through the door, he saw a golden scroll spread out on the ground, extending far into the distance and forming a path of golden light. What is this place? Zen glanced around. This is the path of heavens, replied Mike. His faint shadow continued to move forward. Path of heavens, Zen thought, his eyes lighting up. He hurried to follow Mike. When he was young, he had followed his father like this. But at the time, he had been too small and hadn't been able to keep up with Mike's footsteps. Zen had stumbled and run, occasionally complaining in a low voice that Mike was walking too fast. But his father had never stopped to wait for him. He still remembered it clearly. Now that he was the same size as his father, he had a better understanding. In fact, ever since he had been a child, his father had already had some expectations for him. He, on the other hand, had never understood his father's strict character. Only now did he understand Mike's painstaking efforts. Those are the rules that I have comprehended in my entire life, Mike said calmly. Looking at where Mike was pointing, Zen saw two screens on both sides of the path of heavens. Countless gold lights were circulating unceasingly on the screens. These lights had completely different shapes, and the aura they emitted was also completely different. These are the supreme rules my father has mastered. In the evolutionary universe, you all call it heavenly destiny, Mike added. Chapter 1648, Questions. Mike had constructed this universe. So the creatures in the evolutionary universe couldn't cultivate the most extreme power. This was a limit that all secondary creatures were unable to cross, and also a restriction. Only a certain type of warriors could cross this limit, the godly geniuses. Once a godly genius crossed this limit, they would be able to condense a godly tile and separate themselves from the evolutionary universe. These are heavenly destinies, Zen exclaimed, his eyes shining brightly in the golden light. Above the screens, golden beams of light swirled about constantly. Each beam of golden light contained a law of causality within the heavens. Some of them contained particularly powerful auras, while others didn't contain any auras at all. There were strong and weak heavenly destinies. Some couldn't even be used in combat. For instance, the heavenly destiny of revival of Supreme Lord Lester could only resurrect martial artists that had perished, but wasn't helpful in combat. But there were some heavenly destinies that were used for combat, and the auras emitted from these were naturally much stronger. Zen's gaze swept over them, and he could vaguely distinguish the uses of some heavenly destinies. A heavenly destiny on the left screen emitted a slight chill, even forming a little ice on top of the screen. This heavenly destiny was most likely a complete manifestation of the power of the ice law. With the comprehension of the holy beings, they also had their own comprehensions of the perfect laws. This meant that there wasn't just one type of complete ice law. With the complete ice law, it could extend several extremely powerful profound mysteries. For example, the ice-cold flame that Zen had comprehended from Holy J was a special kind of profound mystery of the ice law. Not too far away from the ice law, streams of colorful flames were being spewed out. They formed little cats that frolicked and played with each other as they walked down from the screen. These colored flames were definitely one of the profound mysteries of the 10-layer fire law. Even a Supreme Lord would never be able to pry into the mysteries of the heavens. Zen was extremely lucky to be able to follow his father into the heavens. As father and son continued moving forward, Zen noticed that some beams of golden light on the screens on both sides of the path were dim. Father, I guess these heavenly destinies have already been bestowed upon the Supreme Lords, right? Zen asked. There were many heavenly destinies on the screens. But he had only seen a dozen or so dim heavenly destinies, which was why he had become curious. Mike nodded. Yes, these are the heavenly destinies that have already been bestowed upon the Supreme Lords. Zen looked confused at this. Since your path of heavens contains so many heavenly destinies, why did you only bestow 128 heavenly destinies upon the Supreme Lords? Now that the evolutionary universe was facing a crisis, an extra Supreme Lord meant an additional layer of combat strength. Every single Supreme Lord was in existence that couldn't be looked down upon. Displaying their powerful heavenly destinies to the limit would even allow them to deal with a true god. Mike shook his head and smiled helplessly at his son's childish question. If that was really the case, I would be willing to generously bestow the heavenly destinies upon many Supreme Lords. But there are many restrictions in the way of constructing the evolutionary universe, restrictions that not even I can overcome. I have already reached my limit by bestowing 128 heavenly destinies. If too many heavenly destinies were to leave the heavens, it would cause the heavens to become unstable. If it became more serious, it might even cause the entire universe to collapse. Zen was shocked. He hadn't thought that it was this serious. Is that so? I get it now. As they kept moving forward, a hall appeared before them. A familiar object in the middle of the hall caught Zen's attention, the evolution lotus flower owned by Master Feng. This evolution lotus flower was also completely golden, but it had a rather dim sheen. This evolution lotus flower is a heaven-suppressing object, Mike said, staring at the evolution lotus flower. I believe you've seen it before. Zen nodded. Master Feng's heavenly destiny was this evolution lotus flower. Master Feng had not displayed the true power of the evolution lotus flower, but it had pressured Zen extremely heavily back then. It would have been extraordinary if he had used it. Zen, isn't there something you want to say to me? Mike stopped in his tracks and turned to look at Zen. Zen followed him. He had constantly asked questions, but he had still been beating around the bush. And Mike had seen through his son's thoughts. Zen was taken aback. He scratched his head and thought for a while. Where did Irene Zhang go? That little girl from the Zhang clan has returned to the Divine Land. The Zhang clan has a special status in the Divine Land, and it guards and operates all the heavens of all the universes. Once Murphy announced the war, the Zhang clan withdrew Irene Zhang, Mike said with a smile. He then shook his head. That's not the question you want to ask. It was not a question Zen wanted to ask. After all, he had been separated from his father for a long time. He might feel a sense of intimacy with Mike, but in the end, he still felt a little alienated. At his father's expression, Zen hesitated for a moment before asking in a small voice, "Father, who is my mother?" Zen had asked this question before, when he had been very young, because he had never known his mother or how she looked like. When he was young, Mike would always give him an excuse every time Zen asked him anything. Sometimes, he would answer that his mother was dead, and some other times, he would tell him that his mother had disappeared. If Zen persisted with his questions, Mike would be strict and scold him. As a result, Zen never got a definite answer. Zen had thought a lot about it even after he had grown up. Only about a year ago did he come up with a new answer, and that was when he had found out about his identity. Mike had probably created him and his sister, and they probably didn't have a mother. Zen had speculated this, but he was unsure of the answer. So he used this opportunity to ask his father the question that he had been longing to ask. Mike's face hardened. He hadn't expected Zen to ask this question. But he softened a few moments later. You and Yan don't have a mother, he said. Zen shook his head at his father's nonchalant expression. A sliver of hope had appeared in his heart. I don't believe it. It's the truth, no matter if you believe it or not. Mike continued to deny it. But the more Mike denied it, the more assured Zen became. He must have a mother. If his mother had died when he was young, Mike would have been able to answer truthfully. But Mike was a holy being, and it was somewhat ridiculous for him to marry a secondary creature from the lower world of the universe who would then give birth to Zen and Yan. Mike merely said that Zen and Yan had no mother, which was a kind of helpless prevarication. This was exactly why Mike's stiff expression and perfunctory reply gave Zen hope. Zen didn't pursue the topic any further, seeing that his father didn't want to talk about it anymore. He was no longer a child, and knew that maybe his father had something that was difficult to say. Zen then asked, Father, is Yan well? Mike loosened up, now that Zen had stopped fixating on the earlier question. She entered the Divine Land a long time ago and is being personally trained by my disciples. She won't have any problems. Zen's and Yan's arrangements mattered the most to Mike, followed by the arrangements of Roche and Xenia, and then, those of Margaret and Nathan. Mike had planned every single step of this. And regardless of how others had performed, the most important thing to him was Zen's performance. Mike only told Zen in detail about Yan's arrangements and the information of his disciples. He also told him what he might encounter after he went to the Divine Land. Once he was done, Mike stared at Zen and said, I remember that you picked out a few cultivation methods in Bromley's Fairy Palace, and have successfully cultivated the Thunderbolt Annihilation and the 8 Smoky Melodies. But you haven't mastered the most important cultivation method, the enemy repelling arts, right? Zen nodded when he heard his father ask about his own cultivation methods. The enemy repelling arts was a shocking cultivation method. It was just like Gus had recommended. If one managed to cultivate it, they would be able to sever causalities and remove the other's heavenly destinies. Unfortunately, over the past few years, Zen had spent a lot of time trying to cultivate it, but it was really difficult to comprehend. You can't be blamed for this. The enemy repelling arts is one of the most powerful cultivation methods in the entire universe. If you don't have too many laws of causality to practice it, it's very difficult to cultivate. Yet in here, you are able to accomplish twice the results with half the effort. Mike said. Mike was only an energy soul at the moment. There was not much time left. And right now, he personally wanted to teach Zen everything. Chapter 1649, Causality Breaking Light. After Zen had resolved the conflict in the Demon Knight race, he would have to take action against the sacred race. During that time, Maha had constantly suppressed the momentum of the universe in the Sunflower Water world. Many world lords went to the Sunflower Water world, but Maha had murdered them all. His strength was simply above any of the world lords who fought him. Many warriors in the universe had also raised questions through the roaring tokens. They asked where Zen and the godly geniuses were. The fact that Zen and godly geniuses were unaccounted could have detrimental effects on the morale of the other warriors. The supreme lords of the celestial position and the sacred race all started to lay out their plans in the Sunflower Water world. The fight with the sacred race would probably begin any time soon. If the battle were to begin, the world lords and grand world lords would die quickly. A supreme lord could easily overpower any world lord or grand world lord. The true main force would be the supreme lords of both sides. Since the internal dispute of the Demon Knight had been settled, the Demon Knight and the Ogre would also help the humankind. Also, the supreme lords of various races in the universe would join the war to help the humankind. Their army grew quite large and powerful. However, the number of supreme lords in the evolutionary universe was still less than the number of supreme lords from sacred race. Win, the only true god of the celestial position, and the head of the celestial position didn't have confidence in the battle. Even if Zen returned, the atmosphere in the universe was still very pessimistic. Everyone was aware of how powerful the sacred race was. Despair had crept into their hearts. That time, Mike wanted to assist Zen. Back then, Gus also knew that sooner or later, Zen would face the Supreme Lords. That was why he recommended the enemy repelling arts to Zen. That cultivation method was said to be a powerful tool to restrain a Supreme Lord. It would greatly benefit Zen if he could master such a cultivation method. However, although the cultivation method seemed simple and easy to understand, it was actually extremely difficult to master. It required a lot of focus and perseverance from the warrior. The fastest way to cultivate the enemy repelling arts was to exchange moves with a Supreme Lord. Moreover, the Supreme Lord also needed to make use of the heavenly destiny to spar with the warrior who practiced the enemy repelling arts. The complicated requirements made the cultivation method rather difficult to comprehend. Unfortunately, Zen did not possess such a condition. Therefore, even though he tried his best to comprehend the profoundness of the technique, he was ultimately unable to master it. The enemy repelling arts had been divided into two parts, the profound cause eliminating technique and the profound effect eliminating technique. The profound cause eliminating technique was to cut the cause while the profound effect eliminating technique was to destroy the effect. The law of causality that the Supreme Lord released was often unreasonable. Some theurgy only needed to trigger a simple cause to gain the effect. Additionally, the effect exhibited exponential consequences compared to the cause. The methods that connected the cause and effect were genuinely incredible. For example, the use of the roaring token also triggered a law of causality. With a martial artist's strength, they could spread their voices to every corner of the universe. Their voices would simply be not loud enough to travel to the ends of the world. However, the roaring token contained a cause. As long as it was activated, it would let the voice spread throughout the entire universe. That was the law of causality formed in the evolutionary universe. A simple cause could contribute to a tremendous effect. The cutting the cause, in the profound cause eliminating technique of the enemy repelling arts was to cut off the connection between cause and effect. It would cut the connection between the action and the outcome. If the causality were divided into two and no longer connected, then the heavenly destiny would cease to exist. The disruption of the link to the cause would dissolve the technique itself. A Supreme Lord that had lost the heavenly destiny was only slightly stronger than an ordinary Grand World Lord. That wasn't too formidable. If that happened during a fight, the Supreme Lord that had lost the heavenly destiny could easily die by the hands of another Supreme Lord. Whoosh! Zen, who sat upright on the path of golden light, silently chanted the formula of the enemy repelling arts in his heart. An intense focus was seen in his expression. He then abruptly pulled out a long sword. The great weighty sword had already fallen into the deepest parts of the rosy cloud world. Additionally, it penetrated through the entire Supreme World and fell into the lower world. Zen didn't have enough time to find it yet, so he could only use a second-rank divine weapon to replace it temporarily. When Zen employed the profound cause eliminating technique, a distinct glimmer of cyan light extended across his arm. He studied that glimmer of light with curious eyes. However, that glimmer of light looked faint and seemed not to contain much power. As Zen continued to practice the cultivation method, the dim and cyan light gradually extended toward the sword in his hand. It crept towards the sword like a bright bluish flame. Not long after, Zen's sword had a hint of a misty glimmer on it. The originally snow-white blade now shone with a glimmer of cyan light. Power seemed to flow through the light and imbued on the sword. The cyan light was the causality-breaking light, recorded in the profound cause-eliminating technique. It was rather easy for Zen to condense the causality-breaking light. With his talent, he didn't have many shackles in his cultivation. A genius of his caliber could easily achieve such a task. Not far away, Mike saw the causality-breaking light and slightly nodded towards Zen. Mike's eyes flashed as a ray of golden light shone on the screen. Immediately, a green lightning bolt extended from the golden light. That was one of the profound mysteries of the 10th layer thunder law. It was named the Annihilation Thunder. Mike created that beautiful and deadly technique. The power of this Annihilation Thunder wasn't great. It was specifically used to restrain evil spirits. However, compared to the ordinary thunder, the Annihilation Thunder could attack the soul body more effectively. It might not have severe physical damage, but it could obliterate a warrior's soul body. When he saw the Annihilation Thunder flash towards him, Zen, who initially sat upright on the ground, suddenly moved to avoid the green lightning. At the same time, he waved the sword in his hand, and like a cyan waterfall, the sword flew towards the green lightning bolt with high precision. Swoosh! As the sword slashed down, Zen felt his hand go numb. The Annihilation Thunder was like a slippery fish. It quietly slipped away from Zen's blade and returned to the screen once again. After he saw what happened, Mike shook his head. The enemy repelling arts is not a cultivation method to enhance one's strength. You can view the causality-breaking light as a kind of law of causality. The causality seems strong, but if there is no cause, then there will definitely be no effect. You can meditate on it and try to break the cause through the meditation. Then you can make a breakthrough. Got it? Zen calmed himself and tried to comprehend his father's words. Intense concentration was reflected in his expression. The law of causality was strong because it formed an integral whole. The cause was the origin of the heavenly destiny. It was like a newborn baby, and it was also the beginning of the heavenly destiny. The really scary thing was the effect, not the cause. However, if he severed the cause, the scary effect wouldn't be formed. What he needed to do was first to kill off the cause, and then there would be no more effect. It was a simple yet effective tactic. As he thought of this, Zen gained a hint of understanding. A sly smile decorated his face as he comprehended the technique. Let's do it again. Mike was always a strict person, so his demands of Zen would only be higher. The repeated practice was needed for Zen to grow faster. At that moment, Zen felt as if he had returned to his childhood. His father had taught him to read and practice his martial arts time and time again. Mixed emotions appeared in Zen's heart as he reminisced his childhood. The bolt of Annihilation Thunder once again shot out from the screen. The moment it got close to Zen, the causality-breaking light in his hand flashed again, and he charged towards the Annihilation Thunder. His determination was apparent in Zen's face. The Annihilation Thunder was cut in half by Zen and returned to the screen once more. It was still agile and slippery. The causality hidden within the thunder was not severed. Zen had utterly failed again at that time. Again, do it once more, Mike shouted with a frown. Impatience was evident in his expression. Crack, the Annihilation Thunder once again shot towards Zen. However, Zen failed to sever the connection every time. Again, thus, the thunder struck Zen time and time again. However, it always returned to the screen and struck once more. The process was repeated a lot of times, but Zen still hadn't succeeded. Although the Annihilation Thunder was just a simple one and wasn't too powerful, it still caused Zen's soul to tremble. Every time the Annihilation Thunder struck Zen, it would circulate his body and electrify his soul. The Annihilation Thunder had a detrimental effect on the soul, so it naturally affected Zen's soul body. When he saw that Zen couldn't smoothly cut the cause, Mike became more and more serious. If one heavenly destiny is insufficient to stimulate your potential, then I will release two to attack you. Zen, you better succeed, or this will hurt a lot. As soon as Mike finished his words, another golden light of heavenly destiny appeared on the opposite screen. Within that heavenly destiny was a cool breeze. Then as the cool breeze continued to gather, it turned into a wind eagle and flew towards Zen at high speed. It was one of the mysteries of the 10th layer wind law, the spirit of wind. Its precision and speed were at a high level. To stimulate all of Zen's potential, Mike could only use this method to force him. He wanted to put more pressure on Zen in order to force Zen's growth. Swoosh! The Wind Eagle pounced towards Zen, but he slashed at it with his sword. Zen's swing was very powerful that the sword cut into the Wind Eagle's body. However, this Wind Eagle was formed from a profound mystery of the wind law, so how could it fear Zen's long sword? The eagle's form remained unharmed. Rip! The Wind Eagle's sharp claws painfully grabbed Zen's shoulder. Even though Zen's body was extremely durable, the wind law contained in the claws were extremely sharp. 2 deep scratches were left on Zen's shoulder after the eagle's fierce attack. After the Wind Eagle attacked Zen, it circled in the air and then returned to the screen. However, just as Zen finished his battle with the Wind Eagle, the Annihilation Thunder struck him again. Pa! The green lightning directly struck Zen's head. Although Zen got the gold fighting soul, he was still unable to withstand that attack. Zen felt his soul tremble, and his entire body fell to the ground. Darkness clouded his vision as he slowly lost consciousness. At that moment, Mike had his hands behind his back. With remorseless eyes, he looked at Zen on the ground. "Get up," Mike shouted with a cold tone. When Zen's face touched the path of golden light, although he felt dizzy, he clenched his teeth and stood up. Determination mixed with pain had shown up in his expression. However, just as he stood up and grabbed his sword, another wild purple flame lion appeared nearby. Roar! It was one of the profound mysteries of the fire law, the heavenly destiny known as the devouring kindling. It was ferocious and lethal to its target. Over 1 billion years ago, there was a supreme lord in the evolutionary universe who had created such a heavenly destiny named devouring kindling. Although that heavenly destiny was a medium-level law of causality, it still allowed that supreme lord to be comparable to a top-ranked supreme lord. That was a mighty heavenly destiny. The fire lion roared and pounced straight at Zen. Its ferocity remained unmatched. Claws as sharp as knives were seen in its paws. Zen wasn't afraid of the fire law. However, the problem was that he had to resist the heavenly destiny within it. When Zen faced the ferocious fire lion, the causality-breaking light on his long sword got brighter and more brilliant. His face also revealed a resolute expression. At that moment, Zen clenched his teeth and roared, "Break!" "Au!" A strange scene appeared. A misty ray of cyan light flashed as the sword chopped down the fire lion's head. The purple flames that had appeared on the surface of the purple fire lion instantly vanished without a trace. Zen's powerful strike seemed to change the color of the fire lion. Additionally, the purple flames that spread from the fire lion turned to the ordinary flames. Chapter 1650. Zen's determination. It worked. Zen squealed as he stared down at the fire lion. This lion emitted purple flames as it contained the heavenly destiny of devouring kindling. But when Zen cut off the heavenly destiny within it, the purple flames died down and eventually disappeared. As the fire lion jumped back onto the screen, a pleased grin spread across Mike's face. Although the enemy repelling arts might seem easy, it was extremely difficult for anyone to truly grasp the essence of it. It amazed Mike that Zen was able to comprehend the profound cause-eliminating technique of the book so quickly. In this moment, Mike gently waved his hand across the screen and it flickered with a golden light. Just then, the Annihilation Thunder and the Wind Eagle once again shot towards Zen. Zen's eyes focused at the sight of the 2 heavenly destinies. He stretched out his arm grasping the sword and a light immediately surged out. "Cut them for me!" Swoosh! The causality-breaking light had become ultimate foe of all the heavenly destinies. The flashing light soon disappeared, and the Wind Eagle that was charging towards Zen let out a mournful cry. The spirit of wind was cut off by him. It turned into a chaotic gust of wind and returned to the screen without hesitation. Zen's sword had also been struck by the fierce Annihilation Thunder. When the light collided with the lighting, the latter lost its color and fled back to the screen. Mike nodded in satisfaction and said, "Although the enemy repelling arts retains itself well against the laws of causality, things will be totally different while you are fighting against the Supreme Lords. This will get much more complicated, so take extra care." The heavenly destinies that Mike activated were in their most basic forms. After the Supreme Lords received their own heavenly destinies, they might have overused their heavenly destinies and brought them to their limits. When the Supreme Lords used the laws of causality, the power proved to be unimaginable. No doubt Zen would have difficulty destroying the causalities. After Mike expressed his thoughts, he waved his hand once again. The 2 screens on both sides of the path began to shine with beams of golden light. One by one, each of the heavenly destinies was activated just by a wave of his hand. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The energy that emanated caused the whole path to tremble vigorously. The Supreme Lords simultaneously raised their heads to look at the sky, their faces filled with bewilderment. The heavens didn't seem normal today. As soon as Zen cultivated enemy repelling arts, the heavens began to shake drastically. Originally, they thought that a Supreme Lord had died, but the shaking never stopped. It was continuous, and frightened many. If the shock was really because of the deaths of Supreme Lords, then the way the heavens shook seemed like all of the 128 Supreme Lords perished. Why did the shock last this long? What's happening up there? This is unlike anything we've ever seen before. I can only hope that it wasn't the sacred race who started this. The Supreme Lords were left to guess about the mesmerizing shakes. Unfortunately, although the Supreme Lords could take guesses about what was happening, they couldn't pry in the mysteries of the heavens. Until now, no one in the evolutionary universe, except Zen and Irene, had ever set foot on the path of heavens. That was no place for creatures of the evolutionary universe. Little did they know, the shaking was due to Zen's training. The heavenly destinies on the screens were constantly moving in and out of different shapes. Some of them only had certain abilities and could not be made into specific targets. However, regardless of their forms and abilities, they kept rushing towards Zen. Swish, 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 swish. Zen and his sword seemed as if they were dancing, swiftly and gracefully, as strands of cyan light appeared where the tip of the sword swept past. These strands of cyan light were like hemps that wrapped around his entire body. All the heavenly destinies approaching Zen were instantly severed as they turned into golden beams of light and returned to the screens. The cutting the cause was one move he completely comprehended. The causalities contained within these heavenly destinies were considered the highest level of power. However, they didn't stand a chance to Zen's sword. And even though Zen had fully mastered the cutting the cause, Mike wasn't at ease at all. At first, he was quite happy with his son's achievements. But this happiness soon turned into worry as he saw his son in battle. Swish. After the last heavenly destiny was finally severed, Zen's long sword circled in the air and he placed it smoothly into his space ring. Then after, he turned to Mike and noticed his expression. He asked with concern, "Father, what's wrong?" His father was normally very dignified, so seeing that his expression was so gloomy made Zen wonder what was on his mind. Mike didn't avoid his question. Instead, he looked at Zen and explained, "As the #1 godly genius of the universe, you have the protection of the celestial position race and my support. But son, I have seen you go through much trials in this universe." "Yes, everything went well." Mike paused for a moment before he continued, "However, if the evolutionary universe passes this difficult trial, then you will have to enter the divine land in the future. There, all of your encounters won't be as easy. The battles Zen had faced in the past few years could be described as dangerous and brutal. Many of them had actually been secretly arranged by Mike himself. However, Mike never failed to protect his son all throughout. In his eyes, Zen was still a little boy. He never failed to pick Zen up from a fall, and always made sure that Zen would not perish. But despite this fatherly love, Zen eventually would grow up and leave the universe. In the evolutionary universe, Mike was the ruler, the omniscient and omnipotent Lord. This place was also known as Zen's home. If Zen really stepped into the divine land, then Mike knew he wouldn't be able to help him again. Who would be able to help Zen then? The divine land was a real and different world. Even a holy being couldn't just transform the entire divine land. Once Zen stepped into the divine land, the brutal competition would begin. Zen had to start a new life and make sure that he kept his eyes open for any danger. "Father, is it because of Murphy Mew?" Zen asked. Mike's meaning was very similar to Murphy's. For Zen to be able to run around the evolutionary universe, his father was also a major role in this. It wouldn't be so simple in the divine land. No, Mike shook his head. Murphy spoke only of the truth. The divine land will be even more difficult for you. If you enter and find yourself unable to help me, please don't push yourself too much. Knowingly, the purpose of Mike's training for Zen was to save himself. And since then, Zen had never failed to live up to his expectations. At times, maybe even exceeded them. At this point, Mike had a thought of calling everything off. He didn't want Zen to take the risk of going against the Hall of Holy Beings for him. Thinking about it, he'd prefer Zen to stay somewhere safe in the divine land and live a normal life. Zen's expression darkened at his father's words. He shot his eyes up at Mike and said, "According to you, why don't I give up now?" "Give up now?" Mike's expression froze. "Father, this is what you trained me for. I must try my best to save you. If you didn't care about living or dying, why did we go through all of this in the first place? What's the point of the path of martial arts that I've always followed?" Zen said and stared at Mike. Seeing the look in Zen's eyes, Mike was stunned to hear these words come out of his son's mouth. Zen was right. Mike asked Zen to give up because he loved his son and didn't want him to suffer, but this was much more than that. Pursuing martial arts was always motivated by something. Not by comfort, not by riches, but for something far greater than that. Zen knew what he had to do, and this was not something he could be talked out of. Though Zen understood his father's concerns, he was sure he had to do this. There was no turning back now. Chapter 1651. Small Divine Land. It wasn't long before Mike let out a sigh. Zen's face lit up with a smile as he bowed to Mike and said, "Believe in me, father." His eyes shone with unprecedented confidence, as if he was ready to overcome literally any problem. Ever since Mike had been a holy being himself, he naturally understood all the hardships that came along with it. However, he thought that Zen's enthusiasm was childish. He was like a newborn calf who wanted to fight a grown tiger. At the same time, Zen's resplendent aura encouraged and comforted him. And so, he decided to concede. "All right, now, I'll teach you how to construct your inner world," he said with a nod. He knew that to let Zen cultivate the primal chaos technique was immensely risky and not to mention insane. After all, no one had ever tried to transform their body in such a way before. No one had even attempted to contain the chaos inside their bodies. Mike and Bromley had previously fought over the matter, and Mike thought that it was unnecessary to take the risk. Instead, he wanted Zen to focus on the life vitality cultivation. Besides, the life vitality cultivation that was passed down in the Divine Land was already a very mature system. Moreover, they were holy beings, which meant they had already reached the peak of the life vitality cultivation. Mike, Bromley, and Jay had given their all to nurture Zen. In turn, Zen felt privileged to receive such a treatment that he thought was hard to come by. But at that time, Bromley and Mike had completely different opinions. "Have you ever seen a holy being's son become a holy being?" Bromley once said. His words had made Mike speechless. Countless divine eras had passed, holy beings had died, and their universes had been destroyed. It didn't matter whether it were the existing or dead holy beings, a second holy being never appeared among their direct descendants. If Zen wanted to fight against Murphy, he had to aim for becoming a holy being. However, Bromley felt that the probability was too low despite Zen's and Yan's extraordinary origins. The road to becoming a holy being was not easy. On the other hand, Mike had low chances of saving himself and enacting his revenge if Zen were to concentrate on the life vitality cultivation. During that time, Holy Jay was on Bromley's side. Holy Jay was good at deduction, so he already came up with an answer after he had deduced Mike's plan. If Zen cultivated the life vitality step by step, the chances of him creating a miracle were less than 1 in 300,000. The chances weren't actually too low. Only 1 in 100 trillion or even a quadrillion martial artists had the possibility of becoming a holy being. Every holy being was the absolute favorite of the Divine Land. They had endured many hardships and suffering just to get the opportunity to make a place in the Hall of Holy Beings. Therefore, a 1 in a 300,000 chance was indeed not low. It was because of Zen's special origins and not to mention that he had been carefully taught by the holy beings themselves. Even during the time when Holy Jay had done his deduction, he had already taken all of these conditions into consideration. However, there was a catch. Mike only had one chance to save himself. Once the layout had started, it couldn't be stopped. From this point of view, his hopes were a little too slim. It was why Bromley and Holy Jay stood on the same side. If they wanted to save Mike and create a miracle, they could only take the risk because that was the only way to create a miracle. The result was what they had ended up with now. It was safe to say that Zen had lived up to everyone's expectations. He had created his own path in the cultivation of chaotic energy. Nobody knew what more could he achieve in the future, but by the looks of it, it seemed that he would be quite successful. Unfortunately, not even the extremely intelligent Bromley could predict how far the chaos energy cultivation would evolve. In reality, if the primal chaos technique was compared with the life vitality cultivation methods, it was only considered as a beginning-level life vitality cultivation method. He had only taught Zen how to open up the chaotic sea and how to control the chaotic energy. As for how to use the chaotic energy and how to build his own world, Zen had explored those all by himself. Fortunately, all the methods that Zen had tried were correct. At the very least, his inner world had expanded to a considerable degree. Furthermore, what he had made was a true world that was on par with the Divine Land. The life forms in his world were not created from the life vitality, but rather constructed from chaos. What puzzled Zen now was how to further expand and construct the inner world. He didn't have any of the experiences of his predecessors, so he could only struggle and find things out by himself. Thus, who could better help him other than the creator of the universe himself, Mike? After all, he had a much better understanding of the inner world than the other warriors. Zen nodded at his father without the slightest bit of hesitation. Besides, he still had many doubts about the inner world that he had created. Some time after Zen's inner world had expanded, he had started to secretly conduct some experiments. For instance, he took out the fish from the inner world, and the fish didn't disappear. According to the classification standard, all creatures formed from chaos should be considered ordinary creatures. In other words, they were technically qualified to live in the divine land, and not to be restricted by the heavens. Zen did another experiment after that. He caught a low-level ferocious beast, the fire-poisonous crab, and placed it in his inner world. It did come with the fact that Zen still felt uncomfortable at casually placing a creature in his inner world. However, something strange happened the moment the low-level fire-poisonous crab was placed into his inner world. He felt that his inner world was sort of rejecting it. It became a hole and altogether refused the fire-poisonous crab's entry. It was followed by cracks that started to appear on the fire-poisonous crab's surface, which made its hard shell become fragile. Soon enough, its shell shattered. The fire-poisonous crab was broken into large pieces at first, then the pieces turned into small specks of dust, until the dust particles dissipated into a cloud of dirt. In the end, not even a speck of dust was left behind. What was once the fire-poisonous crab had turned into a faint trace of life vitality and dissolved into Zen's inner world. Generally speaking, a martial artist could place creatures in their inner world after they had opened it. Some holy beings even had their own family members living in their inner worlds. However, Zen couldn't do that in his own. Entering his inner world was the same as entering the divine land. The only result of forcefully crossing the heavens was that they would be disintegrated and be restored to the life vitality. "Don't resist and bring me into your inner world with you," said Mike. As soon as Mike approached him, Zen sent his father's energy soul into his own inner world as he simultaneously summoned an incarnation in his inner world. Mike was a holy being in the divine land, so he naturally wouldn't be rejected like the fire-poisonous crab when he entered Zen's inner world. It didn't take long until Mike's energy soul had now floated high up in the sky. He looked at the 9 large stars and couldn't help but exclaim, "You're only at the world lord level, yet you managed to build the 9 divine stars in your inner world. It's truly a miracle." It was known that after some true gods had activated the 9 divine stars, those 9 stars would float above their cinnabar field. In the belly of a true god who was a body refiner, only 9 beads flickered, and those were the 9 divine stars. However, true gods weren't qualified to integrate 9 stars into their inner worlds. Only when some of the top true gods had constructed the universes and become holy beings, could their inner worlds and 9 divine stars be merged together. Mike had experienced this and knew how difficult it was to merge the 9 stars into one's inner world. Yet there was Zen, who was just at the world lord level but had already merged the two together. If this had happened in the divine land, many true gods would probably go crazy. It was simply too unbelievable. It was true that it was risky to cultivate the primal chaos technique, but now Mike thought that it was a wise idea. He mentally sighed. He couldn't even imagine how much potential his son had. A moment later, he and Zen glided towards the bottom of the inner world. The aura in the place was completely different from that of the evolutionary universe. While Zen himself wasn't aware of the uniqueness of this aura, Mike clearly knew about it. It was the scent of the divine land. In reality, the entire divine land was actually formed from chaotic energy. It was just that the living beings in the divine land had to explore other ways of cultivation because they couldn't control chaotic energy. Therefore, they developed the complete system of the life vitality cultivation. "This place can really be called a small divine land," Mike said as he looked at the world they were in. As he looked further into the inner world Zen had created, he felt that Bromley and Jay had made the right choice. These two crazy old friends of his had suggested a crazy plan, which allowed his son to find a path that no one had ever walked before. Zen had a certain level of understanding towards the divine land, so he naturally understood Mike's meaning. Suddenly, a thought popped in his head. He bowed towards Mike and said, "Father, something strange happened within my inner world after I stepped into the level of World Lord." "Oh, what's the strange thing?" Mike asked. "Follow me and you will know." His feet glided smoothly as he led the way, while Mike followed closely behind. After a few moments, they arrived at the edge of the world they were in. Chapter 1652, Mike's Disappearance. Soon after Zen became a world lord, his inner world formed its true boundaries. The boundaries of an ordinary world lord were covered by transparent barriers that were similar to the boundaries of a great world. However, Zen's inner world stood apart from others. On the boundaries inside Zen's inner world, enormous golden Sanskrit words hovered in the air. With Zen's current knowledge and experience, he was unable to decipher the meaning of the golden Sanskrit words. He was very curious about the origin of the golden Sanskrit words. Mike wanted to guide him in the creation of his divine land. Hence, Zen brought his father to this place. Mike and Zen were floating above the endless chaotic sea. Although Mike was just an energy soul, its power was far beyond that of an ordinary Supreme Lord. More so, it was enough to even rival a true god's. Although he was still far away, he could clearly see the golden Sanskrit words. When he saw what was happening in front of him, his eyes were filled with disbelief. This is unbelievable. Never thought I would be seeing these words in your inner world. These are definitely their words. Mike was referring to the extraordinary creatures. Long ago, a group of exemplary individuals of the divine land had discovered the existence of these creatures. These people never stopped studying these extraordinary creatures. But after all these divine eras of research, nobody could understand their origin. Everything of them still remained a mystery, such as their appearance, gender, composition, etc. They seemed to be above the knowledge of the true gods and holy beings. There were still quite a few living creatures in the divine land who continued to be interested in them. They seized every opportunity to conduct a thorough research on them. Among these researchers were Holy J and Holy Bromley. For example, Zena's page of golden Sanskrit words and the golden Sanskrit words on Zen's body were the outcome of their researches. And the effect was quite surprising. Zen had reformed his body by using the golden Sanskrit words. His body was by now far stronger than any living being. It was only because of this strength that he could withstand the chaotic energy of his inner world and practice the primal chaos technique. Father, why would these golden Sanskrit words appear at the edges of my inner world? Zen inquired. Mike stared at the golden Sanskrit words, while remaining afloat. He ignored Zen's question and flew along the edges of his inner world, while constantly looking over the golden Sanskrit words. His speed was exceptionally fast, but as the creator of this inner world, Zen didn't need to circulate the space law. With just a thought, he could appear anywhere. As Mike flew around the edges, Zen's figure continuously flashed behind him. Currently, Zen's inner world could not be considered wide. It was about the size of 4 great worlds. Mike's evolutionary universe, however, contained 100,000 supreme worlds, and 1,000,000 great worlds. Compared to that, Zen's inner world was a minuscule. In less than 5 minutes, Mike had already circled around Zen's inner world. Suddenly he stopped. When Mike saw Zen appear in front of him, he stared at him with a strange expression. His eyes were filled with incomprehension and disbelief. Father, what's wrong? Zen asked curiously. There are a total of 1,080 golden Sanskrit words. They must have intentionally left these golden Sanskrit words behind, Mike concluded. Intentionally left behind these golden Sanskrit words? Why would they do such a thing? There has to be some reason. Zen was equally aghast. Mike shook his head. With my current energy soul, I am unable to solve the mysteries of these golden Sanskrit words. However, there must be some important information that they want to pass on to you. Golden Sanskrit words were very unique characters. Each word contained a rich amount of information, and just by looking at it, nobody could gauge anything. One had to synchronize it in order to understand it, which was very time-consuming. However, once the mystery was unraveled, a martial artist could benefit unlimited advantages. The grand weapon refining method was one such fine example. It was Holy J who had unraveled it. Zena's Sanskrit words could release fine bolts of lightning, which had been unraveled by Holy Bromley. The divine land was an isolated island within the chaos. Only holy beings could travel through the chaos. Even the strongest true gods were unable to step into the chaos. And after countless divine eras, the cultivation methods, laws, and godly ways of the life vitality system had been studied thoroughly by warriors, and it was very difficult for them to make any major breakthroughs. As a result, countless martial artists in the divine land were studying the golden Sanskrit words, trying to comprehend cultivation methods that belong to these extraordinary creatures and obtain power that had never appeared in the divine land before. It was not as if this had never happened before. There had once been a warrior who had become a holy being, and the reason he could do so was because he had unraveled an extremely powerful cultivation method through some Sanskrit words. When Zen had returned to the fairy palace back then, Immortal Book had told him that his son Jeffrey would definitely be a good treasure in the divine land. Jeffrey's talent in deciphering the Sanskrit words had always been admired by Immortal Book. At that time, Zen didn't take the words of Immortal Book very seriously. Now that he heard his father say this, he realized that what Jeffrey possessed was indeed an incredible skill. Mike continued looking at the Sanskrit words for a long time. Although he made these speculations, he was still unable to decipher the meaning behind the golden Sanskrit words, much less understand why these golden Sanskrit words appeared here. If you have the chance, you must unravel these Sanskrit words before you head to the divine land, Mike told Zen. Even though Mike could not understand the words, he knew there was something extraordinary about them. Yes, Father, Zen said while nodding his head. After all, this was his inner world. No matter what the Sanskrit words meant, he somehow had to find out by himself. Mike wandered around in this inner world and shook his head, while looking at Zen. But your inner world is still too small. Too small? Zen asked curiously. He had limited idea about the size of other warriors' inner worlds. He didn't know that after one became a world lord and the boundaries of the inner world appeared, they would try their best to expand the inner world. After all, the amount of life vitality a world lord required was extremely high, and the wider the inner world, the more life vitality it would contain. This was an urgent requirement for a world lord. However, this problem didn't exist for Zen at all. As for the other martial artists, their inner worlds swallowed all the vitality between heaven and earth in the universe, slowly accumulating it over time. If one's life vitality was excessively exhausted, then they would have to constantly meditate, absorbing the vitality between heaven and earth into their own sea of life vitality. Of course, there was an even simpler and faster method. One could simply crush a supreme life vitality crystal and absorb the life vitality existing inside. As for Zen, the chaotic energy within his body was extremely vast, which meant he had a bottomless pit of chaotic energy. Moreover, Zen could use the roots of the world tree to collect the chaotic energy, so there was no urgency to expand his inner world. However, from Mike's viewpoint, expanding the inner world was very important. He was, after all, a holy being who had built the universe. His experience in this aspect could be said to be shocking. He was pleasantly surprised to see the huge ice tree in Zen's body. This is the profound mystery of the ice-cold flame. You got it from Holy J. Mike then taught Zen the keys to build one's inner world. One of them was that Zen should create law tablets and record the laws that he had comprehended onto the tablets. Then he should give them to the creatures in his inner world and guide them on how to become stronger. Ideally, Zen should have created a few continents, instead of allowing this one continent to expand indefinitely. The construction of the universe was very complicated, and as Mike was telling Zen the key points, the latter listened attentively. While Mike was imparting his knowledge, Zen noticed that the aura emitting from his father was getting weaker by the minute. This figure was formed from his energy soul. His entire body was becoming more and more transparent in front of Zen, while his voice was becoming weaker. Only holy beings could create their energy souls and descended to the universes through them. Mike had left behind a total of 14 energy souls, and after the beginning of a new grand era in the evolutionary universe, his energy souls would begin to move, seeking opportunities. This energy soul was consumed very quickly, and about 10 years ago, it had helped Zen resist the luck-devouring snake tribulation. And not long ago, in order to protect Zen, this energy soul had fought against Murphy's energy soul violently. His energy soul was now like a spent arrow. "Father," Zen called out. Mike looked at Zen with a faint smile and shook his head. "It's about time. This energy soul can only last for so long. This is the only remaining energy soul that I have in this universe. If I can't wake up in the future, I'm afraid I will surely die." Zen was shocked and shouted, "Father! Father!" Chapter 1653, Tree Palace. Mike looked at his son, his love clearly evident in his eyes. In the end, Zen only saw Mike's lips move slightly. He wasn't able to decipher what his father had said before Mike's soul slowly dissipated. The brown chaotic sea was churning slowly. From time to time, a few large ferocious beasts would poke their heads out of the water's surface to sneak a glance at Zen. After they felt his aura, they immediately dove back into the depths of the sea, frightened. Zen stood still for a long time, his gaze fixed on the direction in which his father had disappeared. 20 years had passed since he last saw his father. For Mike, 20 years was only a split second. For Zen, it was already 2/3 of his life. In that period of time, he had grown from a teenager boy to a youth. His vision and strength had also increased exponentially. He hoped his father was proud of how strong he had become. "We will meet again someday soon." Zen smiled at the place where Mike had stood earlier. He seemed to be saying this to Mike, but at the same time, it also served as an encouragement for himself. He turned and then flew towards the central continent of his inner world. Splash! As Zen traveled at supersonic speed, the water in the chaotic sea below him began to swirl. A whirlpool formed first before it turned into a tornado and condensed in his hand. The chaotic energy within the entire inner world was controlled by Zen. He had the ability to change the form and shape of the chaotic energy with just a single thought. The sea water continuously morphed in Zen's hands. It quickly formed into enormous stone tablets that he held aloft in front of him. Zen extended his finger and pointed it at the tablets. He drew symbols in the air with his fingertip, and it formed inscriptions of laws. At the same time, the tablets also shimmered with a faint golden light. Crackle! After he finished working on the first stone tablet, countless tendrils of lightning began to revolve within it. This stone tablet recorded the power of thunder law that Zen had already comprehended. As for the second stone tablet, its surface radiated golden rays of light. Those rays of light began to emit streams of energy. This tablet was imbued with the power of the metal law. A third stone tablet soon followed. One by one, law tablets appeared and surrounded Zen. When Zen had entered the central continent, he tossed a law tablet gently from beside him. It fell down onto the ground. Boom! The law tablet landed hard and was partly embedded into the ground. Zen didn't pause on his way. He flew continuously over the continent, tossing stone tablets one after another down into the continent. On that day, the citizens of the central continent thought they saw the Venerable Creator descend from the sky. He bestowed them 16 divine tablets to help awaken the hidden powers of the people in this world. The warriors were like a pack of hungry wolves in the desert. They gathered on top of the stone tablets, desperately absorbing the law power from the divine tablets. Before this happened, a small number of martial artists in Zen's inner world were already familiar about the concept of law power. But they had only learned of the law power through understanding the rules of the world, which had some discrepancies with the real law power. Furthermore, the knowledge they had of the law power was incomplete. Now that they had the divine tablets that recorded the laws, a whole new way to explore the world had been opened for these martial artists. Some geniuses would utilize these laws to create even stronger cultivation methods. Once they reached a cultivation level that allowed them to access more powerful realms, they would have the ability to comprehend higher-level laws. This would form a cycle of increasing power, allowing all the living things in his inner world to increase their strength exponentially. Mike's guidance was helpful. According to his guidance, Zen still had plenty of things to do in the inner world. However, after he finished distributing the stone tablets throughout the continent, he decided to let his avatar in the inner world dissipate. When Zen opened his eyes, he realized he was already back on the path of heavens. He took a glance at the heavenly destinies displayed on the screens. Without a hint of hesitation, he resolutely walked in the direction of the exit door from the heavens. Buzz buzz. As Zen pushed the door open, an illusory gate appeared on the sky directly above the rosy cloud world of the demon knight. Just as Zen stepped out of the heavens, he slowly took in his surroundings and was shocked at the great changes he saw. Before Zen entered the heavens to follow his father, he last remembered this place as a pile of ruins. The enormous inauguration altar had collapsed, and the only thing that had remained whole was Lavender's pool of faith. Only a few days had passed since he was here, but the scenery in front of him had already transformed into something amazing. The ruins were covered by huge trees, their thick and sturdy branches crisscrossed. Under these branches, trees formed a palace that seemed to have grown out of that place. Latonia should be credited for such a magnificent structure and landscape. Latonia's pool of faith had already been drained by the ancestral dragon. But through her own efforts, she discovered some loopholes in the universe. These loopholes existed because Mike was dying. By taking advantage of these loopholes, Latonia had the ability to perfectly control the life law. In this matter, Latonia's ability was equal to that of a supreme lord. Zen scouted around the tree palace a few times, looking for an entrance. Suddenly, the two huge trees in front of him started to shake, then tilted outwards to either side. The vines from the depths of the palace intertwined with each other as they wove a path that extended all the way down to reach Zen's feet. As he observed everything that went on, Zen smiled faintly and stepped on the path formed by the vines. He enjoyed the scenery while walking slowly towards the depths of the palace. After he emerged from walking through the dense bushes, Zen caught sight of a huge tree arch. Countless branches were arranged horizontally and vertically formed an exquisite building. While he was still examining the place, a tall figure approached quietly from behind. The figure was extremely agile. It did not make any kind of sound as it traveled among the trees. It also concealed its own aura perfectly to blend in with its surrounding environment. However, at the instant that this figure reached Zen, he turned around and pulled the figure into his embrace, his lips instinctively pressing themselves on the figure's lips. As far as the will of worlds could reach, there was no concealment technique that could fool Zen. Concealing one's aura was simply useless in front of Zen. He had long since discovered that it was Lavender who had stalked him quietly. Lavender's personality was not as cheerful as that of Margaret, nor as gentle as that of Letitia. A bit of shyness could be barely detected behind her decisive killing nature. When she was pulled into Zen's embrace, her body immediately stiffened as if she had been struck by lightning. However, Demon Knight's customs were more liberated than that of humans. Although Lavender was nervous, she did not run away as a human girl would have done in the same situation. Angrily, she suddenly twisted her waist and the two of them fell downwards through the intertwined branches. As the two of them fell down, countless soft branches extended from the ground and formed a net in the air. The net caught both of them in midair and then completely wrapped them up. At the other end of the colossal tree palace, Latonia sat on a tree trunk at the summit. Her elegant legs gently swung back and forth under her jade-green dress, a stream of life law continuously fluctuated in her hands. She curled her lips helplessly. How could they do that in such broad daylight? Latonia built this palace using the life law. Naturally, she could feel every small movement within this palace. She also personally controlled the moving vines and branches. Roar! A gargantuan creature suddenly reared its head and sped straight in her direction. However, just as the tip of the creature's nose was only a foot away from Latonia, it steadily came to a halt. Roar! 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 This colossal creature was actually the ancestral dragon. At this moment, it was roaring at Latonia, seemingly complaining. All right, I understand. Latonia waved her hand at the direction of the ancestral dragon. She touched her slender fingers on the tree trunk and countless strange flowers and fruits materialized from the side of the huge tree. They emitted a sweet, rich smell. After she mastered the perfect life law, Latonia had the ability to create things. This ability did not only enable her to create things that she had seen before, she was also able to create things that existed in her imagination. As she imagined them, these strange flowers and fruits were the perfect food. The food was used to feed this gluttonous ancestral dragon. Aren't the genuine dragon race exceptionally intelligent? It's been so long, but it hasn't even learned human language yet. What a stupid and gluttonous dragon, Latonia said in a low voice. The ancestral dragon was opening its mouth wide to swallow the sweet fruits. Hearing these words, it seemed to be strongly dissatisfied. Its mouth began to produce strange sounds, as if it was protesting against Latonia's comment. Chapter 1654. Eliminate the 5 aging processes. Due to the battle between Mike's and Murphy's energy souls, the rosy cloud world was on the verge of collapse. Although the upper world and the lower world possessed the ability to repair themselves, the process was extremely long. Due to the severe damage caused by the battle, it was likely that the rosy cloud world would disintegrate. Right now, the priority of the 10th grade sacred places in the rosy cloud world was to transfer their members to somewhere safe and then think of measures to stabilize the world. The entire responsibility of restoring the rosy cloud world fell on Latonia's shoulders. During this period of time, she had dispersed countless seeds of holy trees in the world. These gigantic plants could expand indefinitely. Once they were firmly rooted into the ground, they would intertwine and pull each other to close the huge crevices. Thus the world would be restored and stabilized. However, this was not the result of a single day's effort. It needed a long time to heal the wounds of the world. Finally, the peace of the Demon Knight race was restored. Out of the statues of queens in the race's sacred places, 2 had been smothered once and for all. The members of the race knew very well that from now on, they would only have 1 queen. In addition, Lavender had also pardoned the members of the Saint Chain sect. Elena was the reason behind all sins. After all, the 6 sects of the Demon Knight race instinctively supported their queens. Lavender's pardon had relieved those Demon Knight clansmen who followed Elena, though they clearly knew that with Elena's death, it would be very difficult for them to obtain Lavender's trust, and it was unlikely that they would be placed in important positions anymore. However, since they weren't killed in the chaos and also received their freedom, they were deeply grateful to Lavender. Although Lavender wasn't a kind-hearted person, she understood that the Demon Knight race had already suffered enough after such a serious internal conflict. They really couldn't afford any more disorder. Lavender and Zen were lying in a hammock made from the branches that swayed gently in the breeze. She bent her knees and curled up into a ball as much as possible to fit in Zen's arms. Over the last few years, she had spent most of her time inside Zen's body, treating his body as her home. Now that she had used Latonia's spirit embryo to regain her original looks, she couldn't possibly stay any longer inside Zen's body. Zen gently caressed her silky skin and asked, "Have the people from the Saint Spear sect been rescued?" He hadn't forgotten the agreement he made on the illusion battlefield. He wanted to save not only Amber, but also Haley from the Demon Knight race. Yes, Lavender replied with a nod. The Saint Spear sect had always been Lavender's most important supporter. These days, the first thing she did was to gather the members of the Board of Elders and announce the sect's rehabilitation. Currently, in the entire Demon Knight race, all 3 Supreme Lords were in favor of Lavender and she was the sole queen of the race. How could the other sects dare to reject her? They could only obey her orders. How is Supreme Lord Leroy now? Zen asked. Lavender was pressing her face against Zen's chest. When she heard him mention Leroy, there was a trace of sadness on her face. Although she had returned to the throne, Leroy had unfortunately fallen into the 5 aging processes. This was probably the worst thing that had happened in this period of time. In fact, the normal burning of life force would not cause a warrior to fall into the 5 aging processes. In the past, Letitia had almost used up all her life force, but she still remained young. However, the blood-devouring bone arrows not only exhausted Leroy's life force, but also caused him to age rapidly. The 5 aging processes was like a huge pit that was impossible to crawl out. If Leroy was just at the edge of the pit without falling down, then Lavender could have done everything in her power to extend his lifespan. But he fell into the pit and there was nothing that Lavender could do to pull him out. This was a rule of the evolutionary universe, and no one was an exception. He's in secluded meditation inside a holy tree of the Square Spirit sacred place. The so-called secluded meditation was just an excuse. Lavender very well knew that Leroy had been very depressed lately. Everyone wanted to live as long as possible, and eternal life was always the top goal in the universe. To the Supreme Lords, it was very painful and traumatic to fall into the 5 aging processes. Their bodies would begin to age rapidly, and from their bodies, filthy and foul-smelling substances would gush out. So to avoid further humiliation, they would find excuses to go into seclusion. In reality, they did not want their ugly looks to be known to the public. They gave in to fate and silently perished. From what I can tell, the 5 aging processes is a law of causality, isn't it? Zen asked. Lavender thought for a moment and then nodded. It was not wrong to say that. It was just that no one wanted to bear the law of causality, and no one could avoid it. What if I find a way to eliminate it? Zen asked with a smile. Hearing Zen's words, Lavender blinked her eyes, confused. The first thought that entered her mind was, who in this world could escape from the passage of time? However, her doubts quickly vanished. Zen had special power after all, and he had never done anything that he was not sure of. The thought ran through her mind a few times before she came back to her senses. Zen, do you really have a way to solve this problem? If Zen was able to eliminate the 5 aging processes, there was still a way for Lavender to restore Leroy's life force. I will give it a try. Zen was not completely sure. Although the book Enemy Repelling Arts could remove cause and effect, the 5 aging processes wasn't in the form of heavenly destiny. Therefore, he didn't speak in absolute terms. Hearing this, Lavender revealed a bright smile. She gently flipped her body, and a bright red silk dress was instantly draped around her slender body. This was the first time Zen had seen her in this outfit. Lavender had a nearly perfect figure, and in this outfit, she looked stunning and elegant. The spirit embryo had grown rapidly after being occupied by her. So she was less than a month old now. Let's go now. Square Spirit Sacred Place was a 10th grade sacred place that was the closest to the inauguration altar. In the absence of a Saint Lord, the Board of Elders directly controlled the place. When the people of the place saw Lavender, they immediately paid their due respect. Many girls looked behind Lavender, their eyes faintly discernible. They were curious about the appearance of the mysterious human youth in the universe. While staring at Zen up and down, they started whispering among themselves. Of course, they didn't dare to discuss in front of Lavender. Zen followed Lavender into the holy tree of the Square Spirit sacred place. After passing through a narrow passageway, they found Leroy. The secluded meditation was meaningless for Leroy now. Supreme Lords only needed to constantly consolidate their heavenly destiny and use it to its fullest. Once they carried the heavenly destiny, they wouldn't be able to become godly geniuses, nor would they be able to obtain the godly tile. He didn't cultivate in seclusion there. It would be more accurate to say that he was hiding here. When Zen and Lavender entered, they could sense a foul stench. Leroy was a handsome man when he was young. Now, he didn't want anyone to see his ugly looks. Who is trespassing? Back off! Leroy shouted angrily. It's me, Lavender answered back. Leroy frowned, but he still paid his due respect. My queen, what brings you here? It's intolerably dirty here. You shouldn't have come. Lavender's eyes narrowed. Stop that. I came precisely for this reason. What reason? I don't follow you. Leroy was confused. We'll try to help you eliminate the 5 aging processes. Lavender smiled. What? Upon hearing these words, Leroy rolled his yellow eyes. My queen, are you trying to make fun of me? It wasn't that Leroy was too arbitrary, but he had never heard that the 5 aging processes could be eliminated. If there really was a way to get rid of it, no one would tremble with fear on hearing of it. Moreover, if one could really eliminate the 5 aging processes, he or she would never die. Before becoming a true god, this was obviously impossible. That's why I will only give it a try, but I have confidence in it, Zen said. Upon hearing Zen's words, Leroy felt his heart skip a beat. He had personally seen what Zen's father did. As the master who constructed the universe, his father had set all the rules in the evolutionary universe. Thinking of this, Leroy thought there was really a possibility. Leroy seemed to have grasped onto a life-saving straw. His dull eyes were instantly ignited with passion. Chapter 1655, Achieving Immortality. Leroy had witnessed the most unimaginable things that had ever happened to Zen. For example, Zen experienced that attack from Elena earlier, and then there was the attack from that transparent giant, both of which were extremely powerful. Any Supreme Lord would have been severely injured or worse, dead, if they underwent any of these. However, Zen had miraculously survived all these attacks unscathed. After a person had worked so many wonders, if that same person claimed that he had some incredible abilities, it would be easy for people to accept him or her. With expectations deep down, Leroy was as excited as he could be. Do it right now, Zen. Lavender urged from the side. Hearing this, Zen nodded his head and raised up his hand. Just then, a faint light flashed from his space ring and a long sword fell vertically from it. But before the sword could plummet into the ground, Zen had gripped it in his hand and aimed it directly at Leroy. What are you doing? Lavender asked, surprised. Leroy fumbled backwards, staring at Zen in bewilderment. He had no clue what Zen had in mind. Don't move, said Zen. He held the sword in his right hand, reached out 2 fingers in his left hand and pressed down along the hilt of the sword. Gradually, he dragged his fingers across the sword. Buzz! A misty ray of light began to rise from the surface of the sword. As the ray burst out, it did not emanate a powerful energy as they would have guessed. However, when Leroy and Lavender saw it, they were mesmerized and hooked. It was as if the light could overpower all the laws of the world. Zen, is this what I think it is? The enemy-repelling arts you have practiced before? Lavender asked. In the fairy palace, Lavender had seen Zen practice the enemy-repelling arts. However, Zen did not master it at that time. Lavender recalled this misty light and put 2 and 2 together. Zen smiled slightly. He knew he didn't need to hide anything from Lavender, so he explained in all confidence, it's the causality-breaking light that can break all causality. If the 5 aging processes happens to be a kind of law of causality, then this should be enough to break it. Break all the causality? Was that even possible? As Leroy heard Zen's words, he widened his eyes in shock. Supreme Lords were powerful because each of them controlled a heavenly destiny and a law of causality. If Zen could really cut off a heavenly destiny, then he would be the biggest enemy to the Supreme Lords. No Supreme Lord would be able to win over him. Once Zen finished speaking, he shook his sword once again. The causality-breaking light of the sword burst out and extended 4 feet beginning at the tip of the sword. Suddenly, he leapt upwards and headed down towards Leroy. The sword did not make any contact with Leroy. However, the 4-foot-long light pierced through his body like a dagger to his heart. The 5 aging processes was a very special state. All people knew was that warriors above the Soul Sea realm would face it when they reached a certain age. No one knew why there was such a state or how to break it. Even Zen himself didn't know the answer. The moment Zen's sword slashed through Leroy, his body let out a huge, deafening wail. The sound startled Lavender, and even Leroy himself. As a Supreme Lord, Leroy had a deep understanding of his own body. If there was something going on, he would be knowledgeable of it in an instant. But right now, he was flailing around anxiously, in awe at where the screaming might come from. Drip, drip, drip. Aside from the screeching, streams of foul-smelling liquid began to flow out from Leroy's armpits. The place he was in for the closed-door cultivation was already extremely smelly, now the smell was even stronger. What's happening with me? Demon Knight members had exceptional hygiene, so Leroy was extremely disgusted with his own self at this point. After a while, streams of filth began to flow out from his ears, eyes, mouth, and nose, too. Amongst the liquid floated bits and pieces of other creatures, and no one knew how they had entered Leroy's body. However, Zen and Lavender knew that the 5 aging processes had something to do with the special creatures in the liquid. My queen, could you leave me alone? Although Leroy was usually very tolerant, the liquid gushing out of his body made him nauseous. He wanted to beg Lavender and Zen to leave. Knowing exactly what Leroy was feeling, the two left him in his place of cultivation and patiently waited. In the palace above the holy tree, Zen and Lavender joined the Demon Knight members to wait. Eventually, Lavender and Leroy were happy to see the change. The stench emitted by warriors who had entered 5 aging processes was impossible to wash away. After several attempts, the odor would return in vengeance. Even worse, the originally pure flesh would begin to get tainted with impurities, causing the body to age even faster. Although Zen's slash caused the stench on Leroy, Lavender was filled with anticipation. And though she could not figure out why she felt such a way, Zen's method at least proved to work. After they waited for less than an hour, an old man suddenly appeared in front of Zen and Lavender. This old man wore an immaculate white robe, and he looked very well kept. His face was full of creases and lines as he looked very aged, yet his eyes were sparkling with vigor. The members of Demon Knight took a look at Leroy in a daze. They were stunned for a moment. The Demon Knight members of the Square Spirit Sacred Place knew that Leroy had been cultivating in seclusion here. When Leroy arrived, he was an old man who probably had 1 foot in the grave. He no longer radiated the look and energy of a Supreme Lord, and he smelled repulsive too. However, the man before them looked extremely old, but the stench had completely dissipated. Moreover, his spirit felt very different. It was as if he had transformed into a completely different person. The state of 5 aging processes is really lifted. Lavender was also staring blankly at Leroy, blinking rapidly. Age was never a problem of a Supreme Lord. For as long as Leroy could be filled with enough life energy, he had the capability to appear however he wanted. He would be able to turn back to a middle-aged man or even become a youth again. Whatever age or form, was his choice. At this moment, Leroy bowed deeply towards Zen with cupped hands. For a Supreme Lord to perform such a great courtesy to Zen, it was obvious he had a great debt of gratitude towards Zen. After all, Zen's act graced him with rebirth, and was equivalent to bestowing Leroy a second life. After thanking Zen, Leroy bowed towards Lavender. He was quite excited. Many thanks to Zen and my queen for your help, but I still have one question. After the 5 aging processes are removed, how do I calculate my lifespan? In the past, warriors at the Soul Sea realm and above would die after entering the 5 aging processes. It was something everyone would face sooner or later, which made it a fair rule. However, after Leroy's 5 aging processes were removed by Zen, did that mean that they wouldn't happen to him anymore? Did that mean Leroy just garnered eternal life? Zen furrowed his eyebrows in thought. Then, he pondered for a moment and said with a smile, that seems right. If the 5 aging processes do not come to you, Supreme Lord, you possess the same ability as a true god, to be immortal. The pursuit of immortality was a topic that would never lose its novelty. Only after one entered divine land and became a true god could they get the chance of living forever. There was no creature in the evolutionary universe that had ever achieved immortality. Just like Livingston for instance, who had to use the puppet to pursue immortality. However, the puppet body could not be defined as a living being. Right now the entire universe is in danger, said Lavender with a smile. First we have to defeat the sacred race. Forget about immortality, whether or not we can survive this 1,000 years will be the main problem. Overall, the war with the sacred race was the major problem faced by all the races in the evolutionary universe. Yes, Zen nodded. Maha has been rampant in the sunflower water world for a while now. Let's get prepared. The war is coming. For days, Maha had been fighting alone in the sunflower water world against the other geniuses of the evolutionary universe. With the battles, he was suppressing the momentum of the evolutionary universe, so the morale of the universe had been declining. All of these put the celestial position at a disadvantage. After settling the internal strife of the Demon Knight, Zen knew that the time for the showdown with the sacred race was coming. Chapter 1656, Challenges in the Sunflower Water World. The Sunflower Water World was geographically located in a special place, right on the border between the Humanity Alliance and the Thoughtless Minds. Moreover, the entire Supreme World was covered in pale green water known as sunflower water, which was where it got its name from. The moment Maha had entered the Sunflower Water World, this Supreme World had become the prime focus of attention in the evolutionary universe. Day in and day out, the eyes of all the living creatures in the universe were fixed on this place. Many warriors who were unafraid of death had also sneaked into the Sunflower Water World just to witness the remarkable performances of the talents in the universe with their own eyes. Of course, there were also a great number of sacred martial artists among them. The senior leaders of the sacred race and the human race seemed to have reached a mutual understanding. The Supreme Lords had begun to lay out their plans around the Sunflower Water world, but they didn't have any intention of entering it. Instead, they would let the warriors battle it out here. As such, the Sunflower Water world had transformed into a huge battle ring with unwritten rules. In every battle, once the warriors agreed to challenge each other, no one else was allowed to help them. And, most importantly, it was a battle to the death. When the battle was over, the winner could shout loudly with joy and even use the roaring token to announce their victory to the whole universe. As for the martial artists on both sides, they were fighting solely for their honor, because even if they won, they wouldn't receive any reward. The universe was filled with crazy beings. Some martial artists were born for fighting, and they didn't care that their efforts would go unrewarded. They all wanted to enjoy the thrill of defeating the warriors from an alien race. There were countless excruciating battles happening every day in the Sunflower Water world. However, the most entertaining and eye-catching ones were still Maha's. Ever since Maha had decided to single-handedly challenge all the talents in the universe, warriors had been losing to him one after the other. The number of Grand World Lords who had lost to him had crossed 300. Among them, there were 208 humans and 47 ogres. And even though the Demon Knight was trapped in internal strife, there were still many Demon Knight warriors who had come to the Sunflower Water world. Maha had defeated 13 of them, as well as over 30 world lords from other races. Every time Maha killed a world lord, he would announce the name and race of his opponent to the universe through the roaring token. Sometimes, he would even comment on his opponent's strength, but the majority of his comments were negative. In doing so, he effectively sapped the morale of the warriors and reduced the momentum of the universe. But although Maha had shown great strength and a merciless attitude, there was still a long line of martial artists waiting to challenge him. The universe was facing a crisis, and many martial artists understood that their lives were already at stake. If they had to die, then it was better to die a worthy death. They might as well gather up their courage to challenge Maha in an attempt to make a great achievement. In fact, deep down, every one of them believed that they would be the one to defeat Maha. Alas, it was a pity that such a victory had not occurred yet. Meanwhile, the countless martial artists and mortals in the universe were all paying attention to the Sunflower Water world. Every day, righteous indignation filled them when they heard that yet another martial artist had been killed by Maha. At the same time, they harbored resentment toward the 10 godly geniuses in the universe. Where were Zen and Nathan at this moment? Maha had been defeating the world lords one by one, but the most outstanding talents of the illusion battlefield had become cowards, especially Zen. When Zen had returned to the universe that day, he had made extremely impassioned remarks about war. But now, he had vanished without a trace. His disappearance had enraged many warriors and made them feel ashamed of him. Without a capable and worthy figure to pin their hopes on, the morale of the entire universe was rapidly declining. In the center of the Sunflower Water world was a hilly region. A human city was built around this hilly region in the shape of a crescent moon. Hence, it was named Iron Moon City. It was an inconspicuous city, and even the city lord of Iron Moon City only had a cultivation base of Soul Sea Realm. Normally, this small city had very few visitors, and hence very few problems. The millions of mortals who were born in the Iron Moon City had been living happy and peaceful lives there. But when Maha had placed the battle ring in the center of Sunflower Water world, the Iron Moon City had undergone a tremendous transformation. Countless powerful warriors had rushed into this unknown little city, including Soul Sea Realm warriors, Spirit Supreme Realm warriors, Spirit Transformation Realm warriors, World Lords, and even Grand World Lords. Humans, sacred warriors, and warriors from countless other small races had all infiltrated this small city. Fortunately, the sacred warriors and human warriors were carefully maintaining the peace and balance. Every time they mounted a challenge, they moved the battle to the tallest hill near the city instead of fighting within city limits. Since the Iron Moon City was wrapped around a cluster of hills in the shape of a moon, warriors could find the best viewing spots in the city to watch the battles and cheer for the warriors of their races. Now, one such battle was taking place with none other than Maha himself. Whoosh! A golden light flashed across the hill. Splash! The head of the Grand World Lord that Maha was fighting exploded, blood spurted out from his neck, spraying dozens of feet into the air before slowly sprinkling down to the ground like rain. Maha stood in front of the human Grand World Lord, his face filled with ridicule. He took out a roaring token and growled, "A small monk from the blessed Buddha land has only been able to exchange 3 moves with me. He's too weak." Alas, Jean has been defeated by Maha as well. Jean and Kurt cultivated in the blessed Buddha land together, and Jean can also be considered an ace talent. But even he was only able to withstand 3 of Maha's moves. This only proves that Maha is too strong. He is nearly undefeatable. Humph, so what, he's just a godly genius after all. There are many godly geniuses in the evolutionary universe. Where are they, then? In a 1,000-foot-high restaurant perched atop Iron Moon City, many martial artists sat around discussing the battle. These martial artists were all at the spirit transformation realm. Even from dozens of miles away, they were able to clearly see the battle on the hill. But when one of them asked about the whereabouts of the godly geniuses, the others immediately went silent. Maha was constantly provoking and killing warriors, but not a single godly genius dared to go there to challenge him. I, Alvin from the ogre race, challenge you. It hadn't even been a few seconds after Maha had killed the martial artist of the blessed Buddha land when a tall and burly ogre Grand World Lord jumped out to challenge him. Contrary to the expectations of the ogre Grand World Lord, Maha shook his head. I've already said that I will only accept 3 challenges a day. After killing 3 people, I won't take any action. If you want to challenge me, then go join the queue. Inside the Iron Moon City, there were many Grand World Lords quietly waiting for their turn to fight Maha. They had all come here for the sole purpose of challenging him. Humph, I don't care about such rules. Today, I will chop you into pieces. Alvin said gruffly, looking at Maha with an arrogant glint in his eyes. Alvin did not plan to follow the rules at all. He was sick and tired of watching Maha terrorize the universe and wanted to be the hero who could put a stop to it. Maha stretched lazily, ignoring Alvin's provocation. Then, he turned around and walked down the hill. With his back to Alvin, he said, if you want to fight someone, you can look for other warriors. After all, I'm not the only godly genius in the sacred race. Connie. As soon as Maha said her name, a plump and enchanting woman appeared in front of Alvin, blocking his way. With a charming smile on her face, she said, before you can challenge Maha, you have to fight me first. Jerk, just get lost. Alvin retorted, grimacing. He had no interest in challenging a woman. His hill-like body suddenly leapt into the air. A pair of dark golden axes began spinning around crazily, shooting out axe shadows that wrapped around his entire body as he violently dashed toward Maha. At the same time, Maha floated down the hill at a gentle speed as if he hadn't noticed Alvin's attack at all. Go to perdition, Sky Beam Annihilation Wheel, huff, huff, huff. Alvin's 2 great axes rapidly danced in the air and sliced through the wind, creating a vortex. Just as Maha was about to be sucked into that vortex, a black object suddenly shot toward Alvin. Boom! The black object turned out to be a bead that exploded like a bomb, releasing an astonishing burst of power. Alvin, who was wielding the axes, felt a strong force hitting his right palm, causing his hand to go numb. The vortex he had created immediately disappeared. He turned his head and, to his shock, saw dense black beads floating next to Connie. The strength of the sacred woman in front of him was actually far beyond what he had imagined. I've already told you that I'm your opponent, not him. Why didn't you listen to me? Connie said with a smile. As her hands moved, those black beads seemed to come to life, floating up and down around her. At this moment, the reckless and arrogant expression on Alvin's face completely vanished. This sacred woman was a worthy opponent after all. Of course, her strength seemed far inferior to Maha's, but Alvin thought that if he couldn't defeat her, then he didn't have the qualifications to challenge Maha at all. Chapter 1657, The Man in Black. Connie laughed lightly as the black beads danced in the air. With her graceful movements and the ribbons on her clothes fluttering behind her, she looked ethereal. But then, without warning, she charged toward Alvin with her bare hands. Swoosh! Alvin's eyes widened at Connie's sudden attack. He didn't know what the black beads were, but this woman definitely had something up her sleeve, otherwise she wouldn't have charged empty-handed. No, he didn't think she was that reckless. He wielded a pair of golden dark axes named Moon Howling Wolf, which was a famous first-rank divine weapon. Alvin's muscular figure leapt up, and he placed the pair of dark golden axes horizontally in front of him. After he steeled his stance then, like a raging bull, he charged towards Connie. I'll smash you to pieces. Alvin roared as he threw all of his weight onto his attack. With his hill-like body and explosive strength, the power of this attack was terrifying. In comparison, Connie was a lady with a delicate body. If she were to collide with Alvin, it was likely that her entire body would be smashed to smithereens. However, Connie only smiled and made no move to dodge. Meanwhile, the beads that were floating aimlessly in the air began to change their positions and form into a regular pattern. That woman is so arrogant. How dare she take Alvin's attack head-on? She must have a trick up her sleeve. She wouldn't be so stupid as not to dodge, you know. HMPH. I bet she's just pretending to have some elaborate plan. If Alvin doesn't fall for it, he'd be able to crush that woman into pieces. A number of pavilions had appeared on the side of the hill facing the Iron Moon City recently. Warriors from both the human race and the sacred race gathered inside these pavilions to exchange information and challenge each other. Hanging around wasn't free though. The warriors who wished to go inside needed to pay quite a lot of life vitality crystals. They didn't mind though. The warriors that dared to venture into the sunflower water world had long since showed little care for money. After all, challenging the sacred race meant that they could die at any time, and what use would life vitality crystals be if they were dead? Meanwhile, Alvin's axes flew towards Connie. However, as they collided with her, the strangest thing happened. Connie's entire body was as light as paper to sustain no forces. Connie had floated past the dual axes as if she was a willow leaf blown away by the wind. She smiled like nothing had happened. The attack hadn't affected her at all. Alvin was stupefied. His attack should have squashed the woman into a pancake, but their collision only felt like he had hit cotton. He scowled. His opponent simply did not suffer. If this kept up, no matter how strong he was, he wouldn't be able to cause any damage to Connie. But Alvin was quick to react. Seeing his attack fail to hurt his opponent, he raised his axes and slashed his way towards Connie. Although Connie was as light as a feather, Alvin still wielded the golden axes like scissors, ready to cut the sacred woman into pieces. However, just as the axes came slicing down, Connie twisted her body ever so slightly and smiled. She had slipped between the axes and was now floating between Alvin's arms. Reaching out her arm, she lightly brushed her knuckles on Alvin's chest and giggled. There was a look of contempt in her eyes. If she had been holding a dagger, Alvin would have been dead by now. Although Connie's smile was pretty and her laughter sounded pleasant, they only served to grate Alvin's nerves even more. He knew this woman was a powerful character, and now that she teased him while being so close to him, it became clear that she didn't take him seriously. Alvin was furious. He held on to Connie tightly. If he could grab this woman, he'd be able to crush her with brute force. But Connie was slippery like a fish and she slithered out of Alvin's arms. She distanced herself from him and gently clapped her hands. Alvin's heart sank, finally noticing the black beads that surrounded him. They were lined like an array, and when Connie clapped her hands, bang, 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 the black beads exploded and blinding black light burst out, enveloping Alvin completely. Almost all of Connie's weapons could only be used once. The beads she had used just now were black flame beads. The flames the beads produced were extremely destructive and released a strong cataclysmic power in the air. After a while, when the flames dissipated, two charred objects fell from the sky. It turned out that they were the two axes that Alvin wielded. They were completely deformed and almost unrecognizable, their golden luster nowhere to be seen. As for Alvin, he had been completely annihilated by the black flames. This is boring. Is there anyone else who'd like to challenge me? Connie asked. She looked around the hill once, and she could sense that there were still many martial artists with powerful auras, but they all remained silent. It seemed like no one would dare challenge her today. Maybe she should just leave with Maha. These powerful martial artists weren't afraid of Connie, per se. It was just that this woman had countless single-use treasures with her that were extremely powerful, which would make it very difficult to defeat her. Moreover, all of them thought highly of themselves. They came to the sunflower water world with the goal of challenging Maha. Anyone else wasn't worth attention. Forget about Maha. No one in our evolutionary universe can even take down a sacred girl. Aren't there at least 10 martial artists who had been defeated by this girl? She has never failed once. The warriors of Iron Moon City chatted. Some of them were even drunk and sad enough to recite poems. Just then, as Connie turned to leave, a person climbed up the hill. He was dressed in black, his body wrapped in a thick robe, and only a pair of gleaming eyes could be seen from the cracks. As the martial artist reached the top of the hill, he asked, "If I defeat you, can I challenge Maha myself?" Maha was just too infamous. He only accepted challenges from 3 warriors every day, and now, they all had to line up to challenge him. Hearing the man's question, Connie looked back with an expression of interest. She clucked her tongue. Actually, it doesn't work that way. What do you mean? The man asked coldly. Connie offered him a coy smile. If you defeat me, Maha will avenge me. In that case, it'll be him who will challenge you first. That's good. The man's goal was Maha, and he had no interest in the silly word games this Connie was playing. With a shake of his arm, the robe that covered his physique ripped and flew from his body. Finally, his true appearance was revealed. It was a young man. Under his perfectly arched brows, his eyes shone like stars. His gait exuded confidence, and as he reached out his arm, a long fiery red spear appeared in his hand. That's Nathan. I knew the godly geniuses of our human race would show up. That Nathan is only second to Zen and Rocher. Before Zen appeared, he was the first-ranked godly genius. When a genius like him grows, it would be beyond our imaginations how strong he would become. His strength had improved tremendously after he became a world lord, and now, he's only going to be more powerful. When the godly geniuses hadn't showed up, countless warriors in the evolutionary universe felt very disappointed. As the saying went, a brave martial artist always wins the fiercest competition. Many warriors understood that losing was not a scary thing. What was scary was being afraid before the fight. The successive defeats of the human warriors had greatly affected the morale of the warriors in the evolutionary universe. They didn't expect that the Zen that they had always hoped to come would be no show. Instead, Nathan was here. Cheers broke out in the pavilions of the Iron Moon City. Victory was finally on its way. Even some of the heavily drunk martial artists were jolted awake. Nathan. The corners of Connie's mouth curled up, her eyes gleaming with interest. She knew the 10 godly geniuses very well. In fact, back when Zen had returned from the divine refinement Forbidden Land, she had immediately recognized him. And from what she knew, this Nathan's origins were not that simple. Chapter 1658. Stop. Yes, that's me. A satisfied smirk made its way to Nathan's face as he looked at Connie, the spear in his hand trembling slightly. The war had already escalated to the point where the momentum of the evolutionary universe had become stagnant under Maha's oppressive reign. Not even the many Supreme Lords or Master Feng had any ideas to change the situation. The sacred race now held an absolute advantage over them. There was no way they could ruin Maha's schemes. However, the final battle with the sacred race would commence if the Supreme Lords took action. It was just that the celestial position wasn't confident enough to face the indomitable sacred race. After a long time of discussion, they finally decided to just send Nathan and hope for the best. Nathan cultivated the truth godly way and had deeply comprehended it already. If he could kill Maha, it would be enough to help buy some precious time for the evolutionary universe. The soles of Maha's boots scuffed against the rough ground as he left his hill. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and turned around. "Huh, a group of cunning old fellows want to test my strength," he said with a cold smile. Nathan felt Maha's gaze, and the tip of the spear, which was originally pointed downwards, shook slightly. It gently cut through the air with a soft swoosh followed by a flash of light. After that, the spear was already aimed straight at Maha. It was just a casual way of provoking. However, Maha felt his chest hurt slightly when the spear was pointed at him. The right side of Maha's chest was his equivalent of Achilles' heel. His father had been careless back then when he had refined the physical body for him, so his body had such a flaw. He didn't expect that Nathan would be able to see through it at first glance. "Interesting," Maha said lowly with narrowed eyes. He immediately became cautious. It seemed that aside from Zen, the other godly geniuses weren't bad either. He had underestimated the godly geniuses in the evolutionary universe before. However, Maha did not choose to interfere. Since Nathan wanted to challenge Connie, he could observe for a while. The cheers from the Iron Moon City suddenly became louder. It was during such time when the sacred martial artists had the upper hand. It didn't matter if they were faced with the humans or the ogres, the other races, attempts to fight the sacred race had mostly ended in failure. Those who challenged Maha were all defeated miserably. In any case, trying to do so was like committing suicide. Therefore, it was understandable that everyone else had now placed their hopes on Nathan. Finally, a godly genius appeared. What a pleasant surprise. Connie smiled as she slowly floated in the air, her back as straight as a rod. "Cut the garbage and make your move. I don't have much time to waste on you," Nathan said flatly. If Nathan did not care, so did Connie. Her lips stretched into a toothy smile and she said, "Haven't I already started?" Whoosh. As soon as the words died on her mouth, a black bead was quickly shot towards Nathan's face. Nathan frowned a little, but he was quick to react. He immediately leaned backwards and fell down. The black flame bead instantly exploded the moment Nathan fell. It had a powerful explosion, but Nathan had already escaped. However, Nathan suddenly stopped his downward descent. The long spear in his hand spun around gently before it flew towards Connie once again. "Is that the best you can do?" Connie observed that Nathan evaded her attack instead of facing her head-on, and from this, she had a rough estimate of his strength. She thought that this godly genius of the evolutionary universe was nothing. Whoosh 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 whoosh. A small gust of wind blew as Connie waved her hand and threw out more soybean-shaped black flame beads. Although the black flame bead wasn't as precious as the life-sacrificing bead, it was still considered a rare treasure. Even ordinary sacred grand world lords couldn't afford to be so wasteful like her, let alone ordinary martial artists. Therefore, the sacred martial artists thought that what Connie did was like simply using wealth to attack in battles. At her last attack, however, Nathan did not dodge. It was because with so many black beads coming at him, it was impossible for him to pass through them. He had to either use the grand teleportation technique to avoid them, or forcefully break through them. But since Nathan came to boost the momentum of the evolutionary universe, he clearly did not want to use the grand teleportation to escape. He looked at the rapidly descending black flame beads, and at that moment, a complicated pattern flashed across his eyes. The entire world had changed within his pupils. Nathan's cultivation had greatly increased after he came back from the divine refinement Forbidden Land, and so had his aura. "That's nothing impressive," he shouted. At this moment, he did not dodge and instead raised his spear and constantly pointed it towards the sky. Within just a single breath, he was able to strike numerous times, and each strike was aimed precisely at the center of the black beads. Most warriors who used the spear could do the same attack after they reached the Soul Sea realm, but the result would be very different. Nathan was not like most warriors. Black flames were sealed in these black flame beads by using a special technique. Even if the beads had been shattered, the black flames would still erupt. Nathan's intensive strikes broke all the black beads, but the black flames didn't explode. This was because Nathan could see through the black flame beads, flaws, and when he thrust his spear, he had destroyed the entire black flame beads. Good, I've long heard that Nathan is the #1 godly genius, he's indeed extraordinarily strong. Let's see how that sacred woman will deal with this. Nathan, kill that sacred woman. Many people thought that Nathan would undoubtedly win very soon. Combined with the fact that Nathan had just shown his extraordinary spear technique, the atmosphere in Iron Moon City became even livelier. "The truth godly way is indeed formidable," Connie said. She lightly tapped her feet and quickly retreated backwards. She had to avoid Nathan's sharp attacks, then find a chance to attack. However, Nathan had no plans to give her a chance. After he had shattered the black beads, he raised his foot and stomped in the air. Bam! An exploded sound rang out from beneath Nathan's feet. His speed increased by several times and his momentum became even more impressive. Almost no one could see how he moved as he suddenly appeared in front of Connie. There was no hint of mercy on Nathan's impassive face. In his eyes, this beautiful girl from the sacred race was nothing more than lines and dots. She was nothing more than a ball of rules. Die! He thrust his spear forward and stabbed at Connie's arm. Everyone present were confused. He had a great opportunity to kill her, why didn't he destroy her head with a single strike? Was he just trying to cripple the woman's hand? Would Nathan still show mercy to a woman from another race at this point? It was truly incomprehensible. However, something was off, as Connie's pretty face was now drained of color. If he had used any ordinary method, it wouldn't kill Connie even if he destroyed her arm. However, Nathan had comprehended the truth godly way. It was impossible for him to make a mistake when he saw someone's weak points. Even Nathan himself felt it was extremely strange why this woman's weak point was on her right arm. Yet, he didn't have any doubts about what he had seen. Thus, he didn't hesitate the slightest when he thrust his spear out. Bang! When the spear pierced Connie's right arm, a black bead wrapped in a mass of blood slipped out. It turned out that this black bead was her life-sacrificing bead. She previously had 7 of those beads, and each of the beads was able to take a fatal blow for her. When Zen had returned to the universe, he had shattered 4 of her life-sacrificing beads in a single strike. Connie had learned her lesson, so she hid the remaining 3 life-sacrificing beads in different parts of her body. However, Nathan had also discovered that Connie actually had several vital points when he had used the truth godly way to see through her. Thus, Connie had lost a life when he attacked with his spear. "So that's how it is," he muttered. Although he didn't know where those life-sacrificing beads came from, he still understood that if he wanted to kill this woman, he had to destroy the remaining life-sacrificing beads. Whoosh! He didn't think twice any longer and wielded his spear, which he aimed at Connie's calf. Pff'd. A fine stream of blood gushed out, and he had shattered another life-sacrificing bead. It was known that Connie relied on the life-sacrificing beads to keep her alive and protect her from death. Now that Nathan had destroyed 2 of them in a row, she was extremely terrified and immediately decided to go all out to fight for her life. With gritted teeth, she did a somersault in the air and quickly stretched out her 2 hands. Then, 2 sword patterns appeared on her arms. Connie was just second to Maha in the Murphy universe. However, she did not cultivate and instead relied entirely on her treasures during battles. She enjoyed a high status in the sacred race, and thus possessed numerous powerful treasures. Those 2 sword patterns were her most powerful trump cards. Nathan could feel the powerful aura from the sword patterns, but he still had no plans to retreat. Whoosh, 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 a multitude of small unicolor swords spread out from Connie's body. They formed a storm and surrounded Nathan. At that point, Nathan's eyes glowed intensely like a pair of twinkling stars. Whenever he exerted his full strength, the Law Spear strike also worked to its limit. Break. There was nothing else on Nathan's mind now. He only had one goal, and that was to kill Connie first. Just then, they heard a voice filled with sinister magic. Stop, that's enough. The loud voice made both Connie and Nathan feel some sort of controlled. Meanwhile, the lower-level warriors from the Iron Moon City almost instinctively felt their legs weaken, and they simultaneously knelt on the ground. Chapter 1659, Is He Not Afraid of Death? A gale swept across the Iron Moon City as Maha slowly descended from the other side, a lazy expression on his face. However, the aura of his great dominance technique made him seem like an emperor who descended upon this supreme world, and all living beings had to kneel in front of him. The last time Maha used the great dominance technique, it had been completely ineffective on Zen. It was because Zen's soul was stronger than Maha's and he also had the Emperor's soul imprint in his soul, whose aura was more powerful than Maha's great dominance technique. However, Nathan's soul was a bit weaker than Zen's, which made it harder for him to resist Maha's great dominance technique. It was why his willpower instantly collapsed when Maha shouted, "Enough!" Even his spear stopped moving. Maha was waiting here for Zen. He did not expect Nathan to arrive. Since the human supreme lords were willing to use a godly genius to test him, he would make this godly genius pay with the price of his life. Whoosh. Meanwhile, Connie took advantage of the moment Nathan was distracted and quickly retreated behind Maha. Her face was drained of color and her heart hammered erratically in her chest. If Maha hadn't arrived on time, then she would have probably lost her life by now. She realized that in the face of a true powerhouse from the evolutionary universe, all the treasures she had that she used to protect her life seemed to be completely useless. Alas, what a pity. Maha actually stopped him. Nathan almost killed that woman. It doesn't matter. That woman isn't important in the first place. At that point, the weaker martial artists in the Iron Moon City trembled with fear as they crawled up from the ground. They couldn't help but shudder at the fact that Maha was able to pressure them to kneel on the ground by force. Some of the stronger martial artists were able to resist the great dominance technique's power, but it was because Maha originally directed it at Nathan. The others had only been affected as well. On the other hand, Nathan didn't regret that he wasn't able to kill Connie. After all, his target now was Maha. Moreover, he and his seniors had planned meticulously and prepared a path of retreat. Thus, he wasn't afraid of Maha in the slightest. The great dominance technique. Nathan flashed a small smile and with a wave of his hand, a thin rope appeared around his chest. Dangling from the rope was a pale green stone. The stone emitted a faint glow that enveloped his head. Heavenly Sarira. Maha briefly glanced at the small stone on Nathan's chest and furrowed his brows. The great dominance technique should be one of the most useless godly ways. Only people without brains would choose it, Nathan said mockingly. Nathan and Zen came from different backgrounds. Nathan was from the Xuanyuan clan and was more arrogant than Zen. Furthermore, it was also because of his affluent family that he had an abundance of treasures, just like Connie. Generally speaking, any martial artist with a lower cultivation than Maha's would be forced to submit to his great dominance technique. His technique's suppressing abilities were just too strong and terrifying. If Maha's soul were to raise to a certain realm, just a single glance would be enough to make tens of thousands of creatures bow down before him. In the divine land, all holy beings had to learn the great dominance technique. In addition, it was also a method to control the true gods. It was why the great dominance technique was ranked in the top 30 of the 3,000 godly ways. Now, if Maha's opponent had a soul strength that was similar or stronger than his own, then the great dominance technique would have no effects on them. It was useless to use it against stronger foes. The reason Maha had chosen the godly way of the great dominance technique was because the sacred race had raised him to become the leader of the Murphy universe. However, Nathan had come prepared this time and had used the heavenly Sarira to protect his soul, which was also resistant to the great dominance technique. Is that so? Maha said with a cold smile. Then, he clenched his right hand in the air. Rays of rhombus-shaped light beams condensed constantly in the air, and a light purple blade appeared in his hand. The blade had an evil dragon bearing its fangs and brandishing its claws. When I think about it carefully, the great dominance technique is indeed very weak. A holy being who practices this godly way can control the true gods in the divine land by will. Indeed, it is of little use to me. But I'm just cultivating the great dominance technique for fun. Who said that a martial artist can only cultivate a godly way? At that moment, Maha's words sparked discussion among the martial artists of the Iron Moon City. He only trained in the godly way for fun. How arrogant can he be? He must be boasting. He should be bragging, though it seems that he must have trained in more than one godly way. To be able to comprehend a godly way was enough to make one become a godly genius. Then again, the world had always been unfair. Not only could some geniuses comprehend a godly way, they were also able to simultaneously cultivate several godly ways. However, such a phenomenon wasn't rare in the divine land. For instance, some of the warriors Zen had encountered in the divine refinement forbidden land had cultivated the great wishing spell while they cultivated the main godly way. It was because all the true gods in the divine land were required to cultivate the great wishing spell. Besides, almost all true gods in the divine land would choose 2 or more godly ways to cultivate. On one hand, Nathan coldly sneered at Maha's words. Maha and Nathan had similar attitudes. Both of them came from the most powerful clans in their respective universes, and both their clans had placed high expectations on them. Yet there was something wrong with Nathan's fate, and he had somehow ended up being Zen's substitute. As for Maha, he was treated much better than Nathan in the sacred race in all aspects. They were both raised in environments that in turn, created their characters. Therefore, Nathan understood that Maha's words were only meant to suppress him. After Nathan's experience in the divine refinement forbidden land combined with being repeatedly suppressed and educated by Zen, his state of mind had long since changed. At this point, he was naturally unperturbed as he simply said, "Then let's make our move." In turn, Maha lightly retracted the blade in his hand and aimed it at Nathan as he made a gesture. His demeanor had completely changed. Gone was his playful and disrespectful attitude. It was as if he had become a completely different person in blink of an eye, and became one with the blade in his hand. The atmosphere turned as dark and serious as his aura. His sharp and piercing blade glinted under the light. Whoosh! It didn't take long before Maha charged straight towards Nathan. Meanwhile, Nathan did not hesitate. After all, he had already mentally prepared himself to face Maha, and it wasn't as if he didn't have a path of retreat. At that moment, he understood that all he needed to do was put all of his effort into displaying his ultimate strength. Swoosh! Maha's blade was about 2 inches wide, and although it was called a blade, it was actually thinner than most swords. The blade and the hilt were both 6 feet long, and each took up half of its length, which was a total of 12 feet long. It was 2.1 feet longer than Nathan's spear, which was 9.9 feet long. Maha immediately swung his blade down. A dark red blade shadow trailed behind it as he aimed it straight towards Nathan. He didn't use any techniques, nor was there anything special about it. It was simply an extremely fast blade movement executed in an equally fierce and imposing manner. The blade Maha wielded was none other than the 4th-ranked Fiend Dragon blade in the Murphy universe, while the spear in Nathan's hand was the 8th-ranked Heaven-piercing spear on the Universe Spirit Tablet of the Evolutionary Universe. There wasn't much difference between the two weapons in terms of ranking. As Maha continued to strike, he thought that Nathan would first dodge his attack and then counterattack. What he did not expect was that Nathan didn't even bother to dodge. Instead, his eyes flashed mischievously and he stabbed with his spear, releasing the law spear strike. He didn't care if Maha would hurt him. While it was true that Maha could split Nathan into 2, he probably wouldn't be able to survive if Nathan pierced him with his spear, either. Is he unafraid of death? Maha thought. In addition, he also didn't think that Nathan would work so hard. Nathan felt that he understood Maha, and Maha also understood people like Nathan. People like them had always held themselves to a high regard and viewed their lives as something more important than the heavens. It was to the point where they might not even be willing to sacrifice themselves if the entire universe was destroyed. However, Nathan's move was undoubtedly way out of Maha's imagination. Chapter 1660, The Upper Hand. Nathan didn't even bother dodging Maha's strike, unsettling the latter. His slash was already half out. If he wasn't willing to die with his opponent, he needed to pull it back forcefully. Against a fellow unafraid of death, Maha didn't seem to have any choice. Suddenly, Maha twisted his body in midair, swinging out the blade in his hand and forcefully slashing the tip of Nathan's spear. After blocking Nathan's strike, he moved to the other side. In the eyes of the onlookers, the first exchange of moves between the two was to Maha's disadvantage. At the very least, he didn't dare face Nathan head-on. During the past years, all those who dared challenge Maha had died in all sorts of miserable postures. There had never been a world lord who could gain the upper hand over Maha. Haha, Maha seems to be afraid of Nathan. Nahan's the true top godly genius, he seems even more reliable than Zen. Nathan has never been weak. Losing to Zen was a blip. Within the Iron Moon City, the martial artists began boiling with excitement. They had already placed the heavy responsibility of defeating Maha on Nathan. It was known to the entire universe that the battle within the Sunflower Water world was not merely a duel. Every step here was tied to the fate of the entire evolutionary universe and all living beings within it. All the races of the evolutionary universe had already placed their bets on Nathan. Seeing Maha flee backward, Nathan followed suit without batting so much as an eyelid. The heaven-piercing spear in his hand was like a poisonous snake that had left its lair, shooting out an arc into the air, continuing to bite onto Maha's body relentlessly. The spear was pointed right at Maha's most fatal point. As long as the spear made its mark, Maha would fall to death. Go to perdition. Even Maha felt anger rising within. He was facing a godly genius whose strength wasn't too far off. Nathan trained in the most dangerous truth-godly way, and he was unafraid of death. Maha couldn't deny that the fact was embarrassing on his part. With a swipe of the blade, it flew towards Nathan's head. If Nathan was caught in this blade attack, his entire head and soul would have been caught by Maha's blade. But just as it went with their first exchange of blows, Nathan had simply turned a blind eye to Maha's spear strike. He simply had no care for his own life. No matter what the outcome, he was going to fight to the death. This guy, he's not afraid of death in the least. Gritting his teeth, Maha could only roll the blade in his hand again, deflecting Nathan's long spear once again. Surrounding the hill, as the two chased each other, a strange scene played out. Nathan was completely desperate, determined to take Maha's life. But Maha had managed to display a complete counterattack, never submitting to Nathan's spear. And it was extremely satisfying for the crowd of martial artists to watch Nathan chasing Maha around. Maha looks so funny, he's like a stray dog in front of Nathan. He can barely fight back. The top godly genius of the sacred race. I don't think he's anything special. The warriors of the sacred race, on the other hand, felt their expressions turn sullen. In their eyes, Maha was the highest under the supreme lords. Even with Maha's current strength, if he were to erupt completely, then some supreme lords would probably fall to defeat before him. Now that their top godly genius had encountered a godly genius of humankind, Maha was actually in a sorry state. The warriors of the sacred race were humiliated. But some of the more discerning warriors also felt it a bit strange. Just what did this Nathan possess to be able to completely give up defense for his offense? Was this guy planning to sacrifice himself to defeat Maha? Indeed, it was a headache dealing with someone who had cultivated the truth-godly way with his life on the line. Let alone Maha, even a supreme lord was unable to stop Nathan. Once Nathan got close to them, the situation wouldn't be any better. At this point, Maha had managed to avoid over 100 spear strikes from Nathan just by circling the hill, but he couldn't endure it any longer. When he turned around, his eyes flashed fiercely. The blade in his hand suddenly rose, instantly dragging a scarlet afterglow behind it. And at the same time, Maha's figure strangely disappeared. Did he just use grand teleportation? Nathan's eyes revealed a strange light. It would seem that Maha had just used the grand teleportation to escape the duel. Wasn't that a bit too embarrassing? Haha, the godly genius of your race can't defeat Nathan. He even resorted to the grand teleportation to escape. It's simply humiliating. Immediately, a world lord activated a roaring token and gave the universe an announcement. If the warriors of the sacred race killed a human martial artist, they were to use the roaring tokens to suppress the momentum of the evolutionary universe. At this time, all those residing in the evolutionary universe knew that there was an invincible warrior named Maha in the sacred race. Apart from the supreme lords, no one in the evolutionary universe could withstand several rounds of attacks from Maha. Under Maha's continuous propaganda along with the other martial artists of the sacred race's momentum was unstoppable. Meanwhile, the momentum of the evolutionary universe continued to weaken. In turn, the evolutionary universe itself was growing weaker and weaker. Now that someone had spread the news that Maha was no stronger than Nathan, the creatures in the universe thought it a blessing. All living beings in the evolutionary universe now knew that even though Maha was formidable, the godly genius of the evolutionary universe was undeniably stronger. At this moment, the evolutionary universe's momentum did a complete 180, the warrior's confidence was boosted and everyone grew more and more vigorous. In the dead water world, near the sunflower water world, the many supreme lords of the evolutionary universe were all hiding. The supreme lords from major forces, including the thoughtless minds and the blessed Buddha land, had all deployed their most powerful techniques. An example was the star-destroying array that the masters of the 4 clans of the thoughtless minds had jointly set up. Another was the Grand Buddha Pagoda, set up by the supreme lords of the blessed Buddha land, leading by Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment. Everyone had already prepared their strongest moves, including Margaret, who had returned to the evolutionary universe later than Zen and the rest. With the help of the celestial position race, she had also set up the complete God's killing sword array. The 9 genuine dragons with the heavenly bodies were also on standby. Although the possibility of the human race winning against the sacred race seemed less than likely, it didn't mean that they'd allow themselves to be seized without putting up a fight. Nathan seems to have the upper hand, Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment remarked with a smile. This universe's momentum is constantly rising, replied Master Feng. He had taken control of the heavens suppressing object, and with his evolution lotus flower, he could feel the momentum of all the living creatures in the universe clear as day. But Supreme Lord of Original Sin shook his head. If the opponent were to crack Nathan's desperate fighting style, I'm afraid we won't be able to escape trouble. Nathan was personally trained by Supreme Lord of Original Sin, the latter knew Nathan's strength well. In his eyes, Nathan was still slightly inferior to Maha. Right now, he only had the advantage of the godly way, using the heavenly Sarira to resist Maha's great dominance technique while simultaneously using a desperate method to take Maha by surprise. If Maha recovered his wits, naturally, he'd have a way to deal with it. But among the many supreme lords, none truly expected Nathan to win. This time, they had sent Nathan out to slow down the fall of the universe's momentum. Before they sent Nathan to Sunflower Water World, they were completely prepared for it. Using the space lock to lock himself in with Nathan, Supreme Lord Helm threw him into the Sunflower Water World while Supreme Lord Lester waited by his side, preparing to bring Nathan to life if need be. If Maha truly defeated and killed Nathan, Supreme Lord Helm would instantly pull Nathan's corpse back. By then, even if his soul was destroyed, Supreme Lord Lester's method would still be enough to completely resurrect Nathan using his law of causality. At this moment, the other Supreme Lords naturally paid close attention to Maha's and Nathan's movements in the Sunflower Water World. Just as the martial artists thought that Maha had used grand teleportation to escape, his figure suddenly appeared above Nathan like a ghost in the sky. There was an arrogant smile on his face as he said, "Haha, relying on only the law spear strike to defeat me. How childish to underestimate me." Swoosh. With a light wave of his hand, Maha made a deep purple light surge out like a tide, directly overturning the area within 10,000 miles of Iron Moon City. After the light covered them, the onlookers could only see how everything around them was dyed a deep purple. There wasn't much else of a change and they couldn't tell what Maha's intent was. But Nathan's eyes were filled with fear and bewilderment. In his eyes, there were all sorts of rules for everything in the world. But after Maha released the deep purple light, it seemed to change the shape of space straight away.